Hi, I'm Christina, and I'm 25 years old. I tend to keep to myself a lot, even though I have a job and I'm not going to school. My family, especially my brother, might think I'm lazy because of this. How did I end up like this? Well, it all goes back to when I was in middle school. I've never really trusted people, and that started because of some tough times I had in middle school. Even though I say I don't trust people, there are many reasons why I feel this way. One big reason is that I felt ignored. I'm not exactly sure why, but it seemed like people didn't find me interesting because all I cared about was machines. I've always loved working with computers and I was really good at it. This made me helpful at home. But soon, my grades started dropping because I spent more time with computers and with friends. My parents got worried. By the time I finished elementary school, they were scolding me, asking how long I was going to keep playing with machines. As I moved through middle school, with my parents always scolding me, I started to think maybe I shouldn't be doing what I liked. So I started to spend all my free time alone in my room, away from everyone. I cut off contact with the outside world. This made people at school think I was weird or even dangerous, and I ended up being isolated there too. My only friend during this tough time was my brother Keith. He always knew how to encourage me and make me feel better. With his support, I managed to finish school. But I didn't go to high school. Instead, right after finishing middle school when I was about 16, I started doing jobs that I could do on a computer from home. I worked part-time and used the money to buy old computers. I would take them apart and rebuild them from scratch. This hobby of mine paid off. By the time I turned 20, I was able to build computers that I could sell. Things changed quickly when I started a business selling affordable computers. Soon, I became well known. By the time I was 25, I had made a small fortune. I was even able to give my parents $2,500 every month to help with household expenses, and still had money left over. Even though I talked to my parents about my job many times, they didn't really understand it. We had some arguments, but eventually they decided that as long as I could support myself, they didn't mind what I did. Because of this, they stopped interfering with my life, and I could live freely at their house. However, my brother didn't think highly of me. He used to be kind and supportive when I was in school, but maybe he got tired of me. Even after I turned 20, I was still spending most of my time in my room at my parents' house, working on computers. Eventually, my brother started treating me harshly whenever he saw me. Since I'm not one to keep quiet, we ended up having more and more conflicts, and now our relationship is really strained. Things got even worse after my brother got married. It turns out his wife was someone he'd been involved with since high school, but she never really liked me. She didn't like the idea of being my sister-in-law, and it seems like she influenced my brother against me. Because of all this ongoing tension, I started being seen as a problem in our family home, even though I mostly stayed in my room. It felt like I was being attacked with constant hostility, which was a stark difference from my parents' concerned words. Our home, which used to be a safe and comfortable place despite the criticisms, suddenly felt like a place full of enemies. I no longer felt comfortable there, and I noticed my parents slowly siding against me and my allies disappearing one by one. Even though I was making enough money and contributing to household expenses, my brother and sister-in-law still saw me as a freeloader. They didn't understand what I was doing with my computer work. Slowly, they started saying things like they wanted to kick me out of the family home and live there themselves. Feeling completely estranged from my brother and his plans, I figured leaving wouldn't make much of a difference. If I left, I wouldn't have to keep contributing to household expenses, so I could save that money instead. It seemed like a silver lining in a way. As I was thinking about leaving, my brother suddenly brought up inheritance. He thought I was able to live comfortably because our parents had money. So when the topic of me leaving came up, he basically told me to give up my claim to any inheritance because they would take care of our parents. But what he didn't understand was that the reason our parents could live comfortably without working was because of the money I was providing for living expenses. I didn't think they could keep living like they were without that money. But to my brother, I was just a burden in my room. I was ready to leave, but I wanted to confirm one last time if my brother was okay with it. When I asked him, he just laughed and told me they would be glad if I left already. I realized once again how little my brother understood me. He just didn't get it. I felt sorry for him and his wife, which made me more determined to leave our family home. A few days after my brother told me to leave, I was still staying in my room. But during this time, my brother and his wife were relentless in their efforts to get me out. They kept knocking on my door, stopped providing meals for me, and even told me to do my own laundry. But these were all things I would have to do if I lived alone anyway, so I didn't find it too troublesome. I wasn't just sitting back and accepting what they said. I felt like they were unfairly taking my place away from me, so I decided to prepare for some revenge. I'm good with machines, and my brother seemed to forget that. He didn't realize the power I had with access to a computer. I wasn't going to quietly leave just because he told me to. In my brother's eyes, his marriage and me being a shut-in sister was the only chance for our parents to see a grandchild. Knowing that my parents were blinded by this and even approved of me leaving, I decided to set a trap that would activate when I left the house. Finally, I found a new place to live, finished all the necessary procedures, and was ready to leave my family home. Just before I left a harsh message for my parents and brother. I reminded them of all the ways I had been providing for the family and accused them of forgetting all the good I had done. I wanted them to realize who the real problem in our family was. My parents seemed surprised for a moment, but they probably believed my brother would somehow manage. In the end, they just brushed off my words as bitterness. I'm sure they didn't take me seriously, but I thought it was better that way for now, so I decided to go ahead and leave the house. I brought a lot of equipment from my family home and bought more items as well as furniture and appliances. I set everything up the way I liked, decorated the place with my favorite style, and made it super cozy. I found myself working even better than before. Living alone was scary at first, but it turned out to be really easy. The locals were friendly, and life was surprisingly comfortable. Since leaving my family home and doing everything on my own, I've been having a great time, experiencing new things. But then, I got a call from my mother. She asked if I did something to our machines. "What do you mean?" I asked. "There's something wrong with the computers and electronics," she said. I had no idea about that. I used to take care of them for free because we were family. But since they treated me badly and kicked me out, even if they're my parents, they'll have to pay the regular price. They accused me of being greedy and asked for a discount, but I refused. I thought to myself, at least my friends don't treat me like this. I was relieved that another trap hadn't been sprung, but I still had to handle the situation with my mother. However, my mother didn't seem to like my reaction. She hung up abruptly, almost like a petulant child. Then she sent me a spiteful email, saying something along the lines of "mean kids lose their friends." It made me wonder who the real adult was in this situation. Honestly, her behavior seemed self-centered, if not downright selfish. As for what I did to the family computer, I simply reverted all the adjustments I had made for free back to their original state. I bet to someone who doesn't know much about computers, it probably seemed like the computer started malfunctioning on its own. When I told them to contact the company to fix it, they threw a tantrum. But I expected as much, so I decided to leave it be. 6 months after being kicked out of my home, just as I was starting to settle into living alone, my father called me. "I hate to ask, but can you lend me some money?" he said. "Excuse me? Lend you money? What do you mean?" I replied. "Well, your brother and his wife have been spending recklessly. They seem to think we're rich, and it's nothing but complaints from them. They're always asking for money to buy this or go there." I had no idea about any of this. Why do you always come to me with everything? I mean, I've heard of daughters who live alone sending money home, but parents asking their children for money. Isn't that something you're supposed to do out of generosity? "That's easier said than done," he admitted. "Well, even $500 would help," my father persisted. "I'm not giving you anything. I won't lend you money either. I have no intention of helping you out financially anymore." Of course, if you pay me for my services, I'll work on your machines, I replied calmly. You've really become stingy. I guess what Mom said was true, he grumbled. During my unemployed years, he had the nerve to say things like, You used to do whatever you wanted at home, but I didn't care. I just hung up. My father didn't send any emails, but he started calling me more than twice a day. I thought, what troublesome parents I have. A few days later, my brother, who seemed to be in a bind, called me. When I asked him why they were calling me, he said, Tell me why our family home was wealthy before. He must have had a hunch that their financial situation had obviously worsened since I moved out. But it was too late. My current home was my comfortable place. Both my work and life were entirely contained in this house, and there was no way I was leaving it ever again. Maybe the reason our family was wealthy was because I was contributing $2,500 each month to the household, I replied. I didn't have to contribute that much, but I felt a sense of gratitude for being raised by my parents, so I gave more. So now, why would I continue to financially support a home that I was kicked out of? There's no way I would, right? I added. I see, so that's why Mom and Dad's financial situation suddenly worsened, my brother realized. I'm sorry, but even if you asked me to come back, I have no intentions of doing so. I understand looking back now, what we did was terrible. I'm sorry, but it's too late for apologies, I concluded. Anyway, I had no plans to be involved with any of them in the future. Don't call me anymore, I told my brother, ignoring his protests, and hung up the phone. When I left home, I made up my mind never to get involved with them again. Forgiving them so easily was inconceivable to me. I decided to cancel my cell phone contract because I couldn't bear the situation of receiving calls on various matters anymore. 5 years have passed since I canceled my mobile contract and started living alone, and I got married. My partner works in the same field as me, and he understands my lifestyle. He helps with the housework instead. I thought about contacting my parents since they're technically my family, but it's too late. However, my husband expressed his desire to greet my parents and was curious about the current situation. So I hired a detective to investigate the situation at my family's home. Then, a slew of problems came to light. After I cut off contact, my parents were desperate to maintain their lifestyle and keep my brother and his wife tied to the family home by borrowing money from various lenders. But they couldn't repay the money, and it accumulated interest, leaving them helpless. Currently, the debt I found from my parents alone exceeded $100,000. The house was used as collateral for the debt, and now it's a vacant lot where our family home once stood. While I felt a bit sad because of my attachment to my family home, I concluded that they reaped what they sowed. I decided to investigate my brother's current situation. He seemed to have suggested a divorce due to his wife's extravagant spending habits, but she didn't accept it. They're currently going through a divorce lawsuit, which is both time and money consuming. My brother's wife hired a lawyer and is resisting the lawsuit, leaving them at an impasse. They don't have children yet, and it's rumored that my brother is infertile. Concerned, I sent the detective to the hospital where they were being treated, and it seems that he really wasn't fertile. This disappointed my parents, who were hoping for a grandchild, and ended the cohabitation. The family home was sold to pay off the debt. That was the pitiful state of my family now. It was evident just from a casual investigation that meeting these people in this state was not advantageous for me or my husband. After all, I have a kind husband now, 4 children, and a dog. We've bought a large home and are living the life that those people idealized. If they knew this fact, they would surely try to take advantage of it. I couldn't bear such a thing. So, as soon as I knew this fact, I went to the local office and arranged so that my information could only be accessed there. I made sure never to get close to those people from my side, and asked my husband to bear with not greeting them for our marriage. My husband looked disappointed, but when I explained the current situation, he seemed to understand, and he hasn't said anything since. When the situation at my family home calms down a bit and a time of reconciliation comes, I hope I can get along with my parents and brother. My name is Kathy. I'm 40 years old and I work in an office. I live with my husband Bob, who's 3 years older than me and works with me in the same company. We've been married for 10 years, but we don't have any kids. Since I got married when I was 30, I've always felt a strong desire to start a family. Both Bob and I wanted children. Even though men don't have a biological clock like women, I felt like I had until I was 35 to have kids because I'm not very physically strong. I wanted to have the energy to go through pregnancy and raising children. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. We tried to have a baby right after getting married, but it didn't happen. So, we went to see a doctor who specializes in women's health to find out what was going on. The tests showed that I had some issues that made it hard for me to get pregnant. It wasn't impossible, but the chances were very low, and it would be a challenge. Bob was really disappointed when he heard the news. He wondered if he could ever be a father. Seeing him upset like that, I didn't know what to say. We kept trying to have a baby, but it seemed like an impossible task. I tried to cheer up my sad husband by telling him that not having a child isn't the end of everything. I suggested we enjoy our lives together just as a couple. He seemed to agree, resigned to the situation, saying there wasn't much we could do about it, so we might as well go with the flow. But over time, Bob started to change. When we saw families with kids out and about, he'd wonder aloud if we could have had fun family outings like that. And when we visited friends who had children, he'd comment on how lucky they were and seemed jealous. It made me wonder if he couldn't let go of the idea of having a child deep down. I felt uncomfortable. Then things started to get tense between us. When we were trying to get pregnant, Bob used to help out a lot around the house, worried that I might overdo it and affect my chances of conceiving. He'd insist on doing heavy lifting and took on a lot of household chores on weekends. But once it became clear that I couldn't have a child, he stopped doing anything. He said he was tired and that housework was the wife's responsibility. It felt like he was blaming me for not being able to have a baby. After that, Bob started spending his weekends just relaxing. He'd either sleep or play on his phone all day. Suddenly, I found myself with more chores to do, and my health started to decline. When I got sick with a fever or stomach ache, he'd simply tell me to deal with it myself and wouldn't even bother to take care of me. I couldn't argue with him because, in a way, he was right. I was the reason we couldn't have a child. I began to wonder if getting a divorce was the right decision. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Bob got transferred for a big project at another company. It was in a different state, and he ended up moving there for work. Naturally, I assumed I would go with him, but he said I didn't need to. He insisted he could handle it alone. Hearing those words, I took some time to think. Maybe our separation would give him space to sort out his feelings, especially since he seemed frustrated and distant because of our infertility issues. So I agreed to stay behind, telling him it was okay and that I'd take care of things here. When Bob left, he would only come home about once a month. Even when he did, he'd quickly say he was busy and had to leave again. It became routine, but despite the short visits, I was glad to see him because it meant he still cared enough to come back. As time passed, something unexpected happened. Bob started to change. At first, he was the same as always, but gradually he became kinder. He'd bring me little gifts, saying he bought something for me to enjoy, or he'd even go shopping with me. It felt like a small but significant shift in our relationship. Even though he had limited time, Bob would check in on me regularly, asking if there was anything bothering me. I thought he had returned to being his kind self. Initially, his work assignment was supposed to last for 1 year, but it ended up lasting 2 years due to project delays. By the second year, he stopped bringing up our infertility issues when we saw families with children. Instead, he admitted that we couldn't have kids together, but reassured me he had come to terms with it. I felt relieved knowing he had accepted our situation. 2 years later, Bob completed his assignment and returned home. I welcomed him back, feeling relieved that we could finally be together again. We resumed living together peacefully, but that tranquility didn't last long. Shortly after his return, he dropped a bombshell on me. He mentioned a young girl in his family who had a baby before getting married. She couldn't raise the child alone because she was too young. Bob suggested that we adopt the child and raise it as our own. I was completely taken aback by this sudden proposal. When I asked him what was going on, he explained that since we couldn't have a child of our own, he thought adopting this baby would be a good idea. Overwhelmed by this unexpected suggestion, I asked for some time to think about it and ended the conversation there. Something felt off about Bob's story. His family lived far away, and we didn't have much contact with them. Our relationship with his relatives was distant, to the point where we only exchanged Christmas cards once a year. Plus, we didn't have a traditional wedding ceremony, so I didn't know his family well. Despite feeling uneasy, I reluctantly considered adopting a child from someone I barely knew. I asked Bob if I could meet the child's parents to learn more about them, but he refused firmly. He questioned why it mattered who the parents were and why I was so interested. But I believed it was important to understand the situation fully. I wanted to know why the parents couldn't raise the child and what happened to the child's father. When I pushed for answers, Bob got angry and accused me of prying too much. He even threatened to end our relationship if I didn't agree to take in the child. In that moment, it became clear to me that Bob's true priority was having a child, no matter the cost. My feelings and concerns didn't seem to matter to him. I realized I had reached my limit, so I agreed to leave. I packed up my things and found temporary shelter in a motel near the train station, not knowing where else to go. The divorce proceedings with my husband went smoothly. We settled everything through a lawyer to avoid any disputes, including matters like alimony and property division. It all ended without any problems. Feeling uncomfortable working at the same company as my ex-husband, I decided to quit and found a new job at a small law firm. With my computer skills and administrative assistant certifications, I managed to get hired there. It took some time to adjust to the new workplace, but I eventually found my rhythm and led a peaceful life. After living separately from my husband for 2 years, I had grown accustomed to coming home to an empty room. Then, one day, about a year into my new life, my ex-husband unexpectedly showed up at my workplace holding a small child. Surprised to see me, he asked why I was there. When I reminded him that I worked there, he looked shocked. After escorting him to my supervising attorney, I learned a shocking truth. My ex-husband confessed that he suspected the child he was holding, born a year ago, wasn't his. He wanted to dispute the paternity, but legally he could only do so within a year of the child's birth. Even if a DNA test proved the child wasn't his, he would still have to pay child support. I recorded their conversation as a clerk and realized that he had cheated on me during our marriage and fathered a child. Judging by the child's age and the timing of his business trip, it was clear that the child was conceived around a year after he had been away on that trip. Suddenly, his unusually kind behavior towards me during that time made sense. Since then, I began to realize that my ex-husband might have been feeling guilty. It seemed like his current wife, who was younger and worked with us, was aware of our history. Whenever he spoke, he would steal glances at me with a pale face. It was understandable. After all, his ex-wife, whom he tried to leave with the child from his affair a year ago, was right there. Eventually, he agreed to take a DNA test and left with a somber expression. I confided in my lawyer, Mr. Williams, about the situation. When my ex-husband's visit came to light, Mr. Williams was surprised and informed me that I could claim alimony for infidelity within 2 years of discovery. I wasted no time and decided to claim alimony from both my ex-husband and his current wife, who was once his mistress. To ensure they couldn't evade it, I sent the claim to their homes, workplaces, and even his in-laws' place. Shortly after, I received a call from my ex-husband expressing disbelief about the claim. He argued that since we were already divorced, he shouldn't have to pay alimony. I calmly reminded him of the legal timeline, stating that I was well within my rights to claim alimony due to his infidelity, which had only come to light recently. Unexpectedly, a woman's voice I didn't recognize intervened, demanding that I withdraw the claim, claiming to be his wife. Surprised, I asked who I was speaking with, to which she confirmed she was his current wife. She admitted that she knew he had lied about being single when they started dating but didn't care about it. The fact remains that you had an affair with my husband, and I'll be taking a neat $20,000 from each of you. Our child will need financial support as they grow, and that's non-negotiable. But we can't afford such a huge amount. $40,000 is too much, she protested. That's not my problem, I retorted. You both have jobs and decent incomes. Plus, sending the claim caused my husband to get demoted and me to lose hours, resulting in a pay cut. We simply can't afford it. Then ask your parents for help, I suggested. I won't back down on this. I absolutely refuse to pay, she shouted, and my husband returned to the phone, pleading, We're facing financial difficulties. Could you please drop the claim? No, I won't drop it, I replied firmly. And while we're at it, remember the fertility test we took a few years ago? Yeah, we did. Although it turned out I had a problem, he recalled. The test results also showed that you had an issue, I revealed. You're kidding, right? He exclaimed. No, it's true. I didn't want to hurt you, so I kept it a secret at the time. But I still have the paper with the results. Want me to send it to you? When I revealed the truth about our fertility issues to Bob, he reacted by insisting it was a lie. It seemed like the shock had him denying everything. However, the reality was that the doctor had indeed confirmed significant issues on both our ends. When Bob heard about my problem, he was so shocked that he left the doctor's office before hearing the full explanation. Initially, I had planned to keep this fact to myself, but I decided there was no point in hiding it anymore. After informing Bob of the truth, he continued to deny it, but I ended the conversation, feeling there was no use arguing further. In the end, I managed to receive a total of $20,000 each from them for emotional distress, totaling $40,000. She refused to pay her share, so it seems Bob took on the entire burden. Later, it was discovered through a DNA test that the child was not Bob's, confirming his fears. He's now contemplating divorcing his wife, but the financial strain of child support and emotional distress compensation has tied him to the marriage. He confided in me that he only wanted me to raise the child with his affair partner because she's quite strong-willed. He admitted that if he had custody of the child, he would find an excuse to break up with her. Currently, Bob's relationship with his wife is strained, and the atmosphere at home is tense. At work, they face judgment from their peers as the adulterous couple, making things even more challenging for them. As for me, I've grown accustomed to my single life and find fulfillment in my work and socializing with friends. I have plans to go on a trip with my friends during the next long holiday, and despite being alone, my days are fulfilling. From now on, my husband started ignoring me as if I was invisible. He wouldn't respond to my greetings or say goodbye when he left for the day. Even at dinner, he barely acknowledged me. It felt like I wasn't even there. His mom, who we lived with, treated me the same way. Despite us all living together, they acted like I didn't exist. They didn't listen when I spoke. Instead, they would chat happily while I ate alone in the kitchen, feeling isolated and sad. Their laughter from the living room felt like they were making fun of me. It made me cry. After a year of feeling invisible, my husband finally spoke up. He reminded me of what he said a year ago, that if I had any problems, I could leave. But he laughed, saying as a homemaker, I didn't have any options. My name is Anna, and I'm 34 years old. I met my husband Jackson 3 years ago through a friend. I had been focused on my job since college, never really getting into serious relationships. But my friend thought Jackson and I might hit it off. Jackson was successful, working at a top company. Our backgrounds seemed different, but he showed interest in me. We started dating and soon talked about marriage. Both our families met, and despite my concerns about living with his mom, Jackson insisted we live together. Moving in with his mom meant quitting my job and adjusting to a long commute. Jackson promised to make me happy, so I trusted him and moved into his mom's place. His mother greeted me warmly, and Jackson seemed genuinely thankful that I agreed to live together. I felt optimistic about our future. After quitting my job, I focused on taking care of the house and getting to know our neighbors. Learning cooking tips from my mother-in-law and chatting about bargains at the supermarket with the neighbors was a pleasant change. One day, Jackson came home looking exhausted, which was unusual for him. Concerned, I asked if he had a tough day at work. He admitted he did and sighed heavily. Then he looked at me seriously and said he needed a favor. He felt embarrassed to ask, but he needed help with a new project he was leading. There was a lot of paperwork to sort out, and he asked if I could handle it. I reassured him, saying we were a team and that I'd do whatever I could to help. My response brought a slight smile to his face. He explained that he needed me to organize some online materials for him. It wasn't as serious as I expected, but I was happy to help. Adjusting to our new life together, I had been considering trying something new anyway. So, I started helping out with various tasks, like organizing paperwork, whenever I had some free time. It felt good to support my husband. I didn't mind lightening his workload. But after 2 months of doing this, I began to feel exhausted. Balancing his work and household chores was becoming too much for me. At first, it was simple internet research, but it gradually turned into creating presentation materials. Soon, I was handling all the presentation documents. It was overwhelming, and I didn't have much time left for housework. That's when I decided to talk to Jackson about taking a break from helping with his work. I explained that it was tough to manage both house chores and preparing presentation materials at the same time. I'd offered to stick to light research like before. As we were getting ready for bed one night, I turned to Jackson and mentioned it. He suddenly sat up looking surprised. His face hardened quickly. He didn't take it well. He responded with sarcasm, saying he had been depending on my help for the project. He dismissed my concerns, implying that as a homemaker, I wouldn't understand. I was shocked. Jackson, who was usually kind and cheerful, said hurtful things. I was speechless. He didn't listen to me and just went back to bed, ignoring my protests. Then he said he would treat me like I was invisible from now on. It felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe he would say something like that. I tried to argue back, but he ignored me and went back to sleep. Despite my efforts to wake him, Jackson had already fallen asleep. True to his word, he started ignoring me completely. He didn't respond to my greetings in the morning, or when I said goodbye as he left for work. Even at dinner time, he acted as if I wasn't there. His mom acted the same way, pretending I didn't exist, even though we shared the same space. It was painfully awkward, and no matter how much I tried to start a conversation, she wouldn't acknowledge me. Gradually, Jackson started having meals just with his mom, leaving me to eat alone in the kitchen. Their laughter from the living room felt like they were mocking me, and it made me feel so sad that I wanted to cry. I couldn't help but think that maybe some of this was my fault. If I had been better at managing the house chores and assisting Jackson, maybe things wouldn't have turned out like this. I hoped that Jackson was just angry and that things would get better with time. But I didn't have the courage to stand up for myself, so I just endured it. Days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, nearly a year had passed. Jackson and my mother-in-law continued to ignore me, even cutting off my allowance. I had to rely on my savings from before we were married just to get by. As I was bringing in laundry for all of us, I sighed, wondering why I had even gotten married. I thought about lunch and started heading downstairs from the second-floor balcony to the living room on the first floor. But then I made a mistake. I missed a step and fell down the stairs, landing with a loud thud. It hurt, and I rubbed my sore backside, grateful that it didn't seem like I had any serious injuries. As I sat there, bracing myself for a massive bruise on my butt, I heard hurried footsteps from the living room. My mother-in-law rushed over, asking if I was okay, and if I had fallen down the stairs. She seemed genuinely concerned, which was surprising since we hadn't really talked in a long time. Overwhelmed by the sudden conversation, I blurted out that I hadn't heard her voice in so long. She froze, looking surprised. Quickly realizing I had said something odd, I tried to cover it up with a cheerful tone, saying I wasn't hurt and it was nice to talk to her again. I even threw in a playful joke to lighten the mood, but she looked like she was about to cry. Then she asked if I hated her. I was confused. Why would she think that? She started revealing something shocking. About a year ago, when Jackson started ignoring me, he somehow convinced his mother that I hated her and that it was best for her not to talk to me. It seemed like Jackson didn't like me disobeying him, so he isolated me at home, maybe to control me. I couldn't believe that Jackson, who was always kind and adored by everyone, could do something so terrible. And his mom, who was also kind-hearted, believed him completely, thinking I despised her. I reassured her that I liked her and appreciated all the things she had done for me, like sharing cooking secrets and welcoming me with open arms. She seemed to believe me and apologized for not verifying the truth with me first. She suggested that we confront Jackson about this when he got back from work. After that, we spent a lot of time catching up, and it was the most enjoyable time I had had in recent memory. It felt good to finally clear the air and have a real conversation with my mother-in-law. Jackson came back from work, looking surprised to see me and his mom chatting away. He quickly brushed it off and grabbed a beer from the fridge, acting as if everything was normal. But his mom wasn't having it. She calmly told him to sit down because they needed to talk. Without a word, he took a seat at the table. His mom didn't beat around the bush. She told Jackson to stop tormenting me and apologize right there and then. But Jackson scoffed, asking for evidence and acting confident that he hadn't done anything wrong. And he was right. There was no hard evidence to prove his mistreatment of me. Both his mom and I were speechless. Then Jackson turned to me and asked if I really hated him that much, reminding me that he had suggested I leave a year ago, knowing I wouldn't have many options as a homemaker with no income. He was right. I wouldn't be able to support myself if I left, even though my parents couldn't take me in either. But I had enough. I couldn't stay with him any longer. I brushed off his mother's pleas for me to stay and started packing my things. I only took what I needed for the immediate future and thanked them before leaving. A week later, I was staying at a hotel near the train station, sorting out my future plans. Then Jackson called me, furious about a letter I supposedly sent to his workplace, accusing him of being a bully and a slacker. I played dumb, pretending I had no idea what he was talking about. But in reality, I had written that letter after leaving his mom's house. I embellished the truth, making him out to be much worse than he actually was, and now he was facing consequences at work because of it. He was furious, but I had no regrets. Jackson was long gone, likely shouting and with a demonic expression. If you claimed so, you must have proof, right? Go on, show me the evidence that I mailed the letter. I retorted with the exact words he had thrown at me just days ago. His fury peaked, and he started shrieking unintelligibly. There was no reasoning with him anymore, so I just ended the call, saying, "Well, I'll hang up then." The following day, I swung by my in-laws' house to discuss the future with Jackson. We hadn't scheduled anything, but since it was Sunday, he should be home. I let myself in using a spare key. I didn't see my mother-in-law's shoes, so she might be out shopping. Instead, I noticed unfamiliar high heels at the entrance. As I pondered if they could be hers, I heard noises coming from the master bedroom. I had an ominous feeling, so I dumped my bags in the hallway and started filming with my phone as I approached the bedroom. Amidst the clattering noise, I could hear the voices of a man and a woman. I braced myself and thrust open the bedroom door. There was Jackson, naked, and an unknown woman sprawled on the bed. The woman spotted me and let out a startled squeal. Then Jackson gasped, "Whoa, Anna." Oddly enough, I felt incredibly composed, so I decided to quietly keep the camera rolling. The woman, in a state of panic, quickly gathered the scattered clothes on the bed to cover herself. "Is she the wife? You're joking, right? You said you divorced her 6 months ago. You said you were going to marry me, the woman exclaimed. Not only was this guy tormenting me, but he was also cheating. He must have thought I was the perfect little housemaid. No, it's not like that. It's not what it seems. Jackson muttered incoherently. Then the woman decided to get dressed and leave, declaring that they should break up. Silence engulfed the room. When I addressed Jackson, his shoulders twitched, and then he sprang out of bed, begging for my forgiveness. What a laughable sight. I'll do anything, just please don't share that video. He seemed truly terrified. He must have been shocked by how well my strategy worked. So you'll acknowledge your wrongdoings and agree to divorce me after all. I have evidence now, I proposed. He responded with a barely audible yes. Sometime later, Jackson and I officially got divorced. Of course, I received alimony, which he agreed to pay in one go. He was demoted after his superiors discovered he was shirking his work onto his colleagues. Moreover, his reputation at work plummeted due to rumors about him mistreating his wife and our divorce. Jackson, always a stickler for appearances, couldn't bear it and ended up quitting his job. Now, he seems to be living a hermit's life in his mother's house. His mom decided to continue living with him to make amends for the hassle he caused his wife, keeping tabs on his lifestyle and attempting to reshape his behavior. I do feel a bit sorry for him. When our son suddenly got sick, I felt really tired and stressed. But instead of helping out, my husband, Nolan, just told me to take care of the house and our child. He said he only married me because he knew I would put up with his affairs. He didn't seem to care that our son was sick. He was drinking beer while I watched in shock. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ruby, and I'm 33 years old. I met Nolan, who's 8 years older than me, on a dating service about 4 years ago. He's successful in his job, but he can be a bit arrogant. He's more outgoing than I am, and I liked that about him. He always praised me for being humble. After we moved in together, I tried hard to live up to his expectations. After dating for a year, Nolan asked me to marry him, and I said yes. He told me he would take care of the money, and he wanted me to manage the house. So I quit my job, and we had a big wedding. He moved into my apartment, and I focused on taking care of our home and him. I didn't mind, and I even stopped working to respect his wishes. My family was happy for us, and my friends were a bit jealous. From the outside, it seemed like we had a perfect marriage. Nolan was successful and handsome, and we had a cute son named Liam. But things started to change after our first anniversary. Nolan was excited when Liam was born, but he started spending more time at work and less time helping with our son. When I asked for his help, he would get angry and say he was too busy with work. He started coming home late, sometimes drunk. I even noticed a different smell on him sometimes. Taking care of our son became harder and harder for me, but Nolan still expected me to give him the same attention as before. One time, I fell asleep while taking care of Liam, and Nolan got mad at me for not doing my job. His words hurt me a lot. The next morning, I saw my husband off, feeling irritated. I continued with my usual routine, waiting for him to come back. But that evening, he came home early and brought up the topic of divorce. He said if I was unhappy, I should apologize sincerely and prove it. Thinking about Liam, I didn't want him to grow up without his dad, so I held back my tears and apologized. That evening, I cried more than I ever had before. Thinking about it later, the only comfort I had was seeing Liam sleeping peacefully. I tried harder to please my husband and take care of our son, but he still stayed out late. He would often remind me that if I wasn't happy, we could split up. I tried to adjust to this new situation, but the exhaustion from taking care of the house and dealing with our issues overwhelmed me. One day, I accidentally fell asleep next to Liam. I was woken up by his crying. Worried, I realized he had a fever, so I rushed him to the hospital. Luckily, it wasn't anything serious, but they suggested he stay overnight for observation. The nurse said I could go home to get some things while they watched over Liam. Reluctant to bother my husband at work, I finally called him, but he didn't answer. I left him a message, grabbed what I needed, and rushed back to the hospital. Liam stayed fussy all day, finally falling asleep around 11 p.m. They prepared a small bed for me, but I couldn't rest or even use the bathroom. As I sipped on some hot cocoa from a vending machine, my phone buzzed. It was my husband, asking where I was. His sharp tone made me nervous. I explained that I was at the hospital with Liam, but he seemed more concerned about his dinner. I tried to keep calm, reminding him that I had left a note and there was food in the fridge, but he was upset that I wasn't at home to make dinner for him, saying it wasn't right for a man to cook. He told me to come home instead of staying at the hospital. I could hear the sound of a beer can opening in the background while he talked. Despite his words, he didn't mind going to the kitchen for a drink. He didn't mention anything about our son, and he wasn't planning to come and get me either. Anger bubbled up inside me as I listened to him start his nightly drinking routine. You want me to leave our son, who's not even a year old, alone here? It's still a hospital, even if it's just for tests. Doesn't it bother you? My voice rose higher than I meant it to, and he sighed in annoyance. Really getting brave because I can't see you. Keep acting like this, and I'll file for divorce. How do you think you'll manage on your own in this economy, with your background and education? It's your job to take care of the home and our kid. This happened because you're slacking off. Not this again. I couldn't hold back anymore. Balancing childcare and household duties had always been tough, but I had believed he truly cared about our family. I ignored his late nights, thinking he was doing it for us. Then I heard another beer can open on his side. Right after he took a sip, he exploded. Are you kidding me? Who do you think pays the bills here? Give me a break. Your only job should be taking care of the house and our child. Then you're done for. Excuse me, women start losing their charm after 30. I won't stay with someone who's past their prime. It's only natural for a guy to want someone younger. I only settled for you because I knew you'd put up with affairs. I was speechless. His hurtful remarks, not entirely because of the alcohol, left me stunned. Then I heard him laugh mockingly. I don't want to be shackled to a family. I had enough to drink, and I'm not hungry. I'm heading to bed. I'll be out tomorrow, so don't call and bother me, okay? If you want to keep this marriage, think about where you stand here. Remember who's putting food on the table. Then he hung up on me. Something inside me broke. Suddenly, everything felt unreal. Seeing that he only viewed our marriage and child as conveniences, all the love I felt for him disappeared. My sadness quickly turned into rage. I couldn't bear that he didn't value our own son. I wasn't the submissive wife he thought he knew. I was determined to make him regret taking a mother for granted. The following day, while Liam was getting his tests done, I reached out to a private investigator. A couple of days later, with Liam thankfully in the clear, we headed home. Predictably, my husband wasn't there to welcome us, and he didn't react to my update about Liam's condition. He'd eventually stumbled home drunk at dawn. I greeted him softly at the door, saying, I've thought about where I stand. Fine, I won't hold it against you this time. Consider yourself lucky. He snorted and made a beeline for the bedroom, leaving a trail of clothes behind. When I picked up his shirt, I noticed what looked like makeup glitter. Suit yourself, I thought. Looking at the man who was just another middle-aged guy now, I started planning my next steps. A month passed, and I was jolted awake by the insistent ringing of the doorbell early one morning. Come on, open up. Why won't my key work? Your husband is back, the voice said. It sounded like Nolan was back from his 3-day trip. I had anticipated his return tonight, but he came back this morning instead. I had my suspicions about it being an actual business trip, but at this point, it was irrelevant. Squinting through my sleepiness, I called his number. Do you mind? It's early, and you're bugging the neighbors. The key is not working. Did Liam mess with it? This is what happens when you're not paying attention. The lock isn't broken, he said. What? That doesn't make sense. I swapped out the locks while you were away, I replied. Peering out from the upstairs window, I could see him standing there, looking completely lost. What on earth did you do without asking me? Who do you think runs this house? I'll divorce you. If you don't want that, then just unlock the door, he demanded. Oh, I've taken care of that, I said calmly. Taken care of what? The divorce. I filed the papers. We're officially strangers now. Hold on. What are you talking about? I never signed any paperwork. I see what you did. You filled it out yourself, huh? That's illegal, and it won't hold up in court. I couldn't help but smirk at his overconfident expression. You've forgotten, haven't you? Remember the time you first mentioned divorce? You brought home a filled-out form. What are you talking about? That's right. On that heart-wrenching day, you came home with a pre-filled divorce form. After my apology, you crumpled it and chucked it at me. I thought you threw it out. I kept it, thinking it might come in handy. In hindsight, I guess I always sensed this day would come. As I reminisced, he looked visibly shaken, mouth wide open. What about this house and our expenses? How do you expect to live, being a stay-at-home mom? Oh, this is so sad. Our young son's going to suffer because of your impulsive choices. Get it straight. Remember, this house came from my grandparents, making me the legal owner. You were just living here. And regarding finances, I landed a job. You're making that up. You couldn't have found a job in this short time. I've been painting in my free time. You always told me not to go to bed before you, so I painted while waiting up for you. After posting my art online, a publisher got interested. Seriously, is that even possible? Maybe you're getting duped. Artists going viral isn't unheard of nowadays. It's a well-known publisher, I said, watching his reaction carefully. He looked shell-shocked, murmuring, "Is this even real?" It felt refreshing to hear him talk without the usual sarcasm or shouting. Yeah, I'm all set for now. And on top of that, what? He trailed off, clearly surprised. There's the spousal support you'll be paying, I informed him. Say what now? I opened the window and tossed him the photos I got from the private investigator. If it was just about you hitting the clubs, I might have let it slide, but you were involved with one of the girls. When I contacted her workplace and the ladies realized they weren't getting sued, they quickly sided with me. He frantically scooped up the photos, his face turning as white as a sheet. I couldn't blame him. The pictures clearly displayed him with a younger woman from the nightlife scene, heading into a shady establishment. Here's more for you, I said, showing him screenshots of his messages, clear evidence of how he neglected me and our son. As morning broke and people began starting their day, it was evident that he didn't have much ground to stand on with those pictures and messages. I've been keeping tabs on all your actions and words. I'll hand all this over to my lawyer. You can keep those photos. I've got everything backed up, I declared. A PI? A lawyer? You think you're pulling this off with my money, he retorted. It's from my savings before our marriage. Not sure why you'd have a problem with that, I shot back. He stared at me, holding back his anger. Since our wedding, I've been saving money because he wanted me to be thrifty, so I rarely splurged on myself, leaving most of my savings untouched. Honestly, I was taken aback by how much I had stashed away. I shouldn't have taken action earlier. I'm upset with my past self for being so submissive. Perhaps concerned about nosy neighbors, he tried to smile and softly said, "All right, I understand. I'm sorry. Just let me in. We're still married, right?" I no longer checked the mailbox. He promptly checked it and took out an envelope, inspecting its contents. Inside, there was a key to a storage unit and its location. Everything he owned, all purchased with his earnings since we got married, was stored there. The car was his too now. Kindly, I told him to disappear. I was thankful he never contributed to household chores. It meant I knew where all his belongings were. He probably didn't even know how many shirts he owned. I can't live without you. His sudden desperation left me unfazed. I'm fine on my own. Besides, you said I was done for. You're not tied to a fading rose and its seed, are you? Maybe find a younger woman to look after you. Hold on, listen. Moving forward, talk to my attorney. If you linger, I won't hesitate to call the cops. Goodbye. I ended the call, locked all the windows, and shut the blinds. For some time, he incessantly buzzed the doorbell and tried the door. I ignored his barrage of "I'm sorry" texts. When the neighbors started gossiping about his antics, he quickly jumped into his car and left. Later on, I got word from his folks. Turns out, he'd blown all of his personal funds from his single days on nightlife and ended up begging his parents for help. After I laid out the whole story for them, backed by evidence, they gave me an envelope a few days later holding the full alimony they paid for him. I learned he'd been diverting company money for his leisure activities. Given his senior position, once I blew the whistle, he got blacklisted from those venues. His abrupt shift in spending habits raised red flags at his job. While he wasn't fired, he was moved to a smaller role in a distant office. Now he's holed up in a budget apartment. Considering he'd never done any housework, I shuddered to think about the state of his place. But I don't feel sorry for him. He made his bed. Meanwhile, after selling the house and filling in my folks, I moved back home and became an illustrator while also working a side gig at a grocery store. It's not a lavish lifestyle, but I can buy what I want when I wish. My parents have been a rock, and best of all, my son has been thriving with no significant health issues. Recently, he's even expressed a desire to pitch in, which fills me with joy. Even without a dad in the picture, I've promised myself, pointing to where my wedding ring used to be both parents and guarantee my son's happiness. My son, who earns a lot of money, and you, who don't work, don't get along. My son and I want to live here now, so please leave right away. One day when my husband, who usually stays in his room, was out, the intercom at my house buzzed a lot. When I opened the door, my mother-in-law was there, looking excited. Surprised by her sudden visit, I asked, "Hello, mother-in-law. What brings you here at this time?" But before I could say anything else, she scolded me for not answering the intercom right away. She didn't believe I was working. She said I was just being lazy. I tried to explain, but she didn't listen. She thought it was unfair that I lived a comfortable life here without working while benefiting from my son's salary. She said my son, and she wanted to start a new life here without me, and she gave me divorce papers to sign. I was shocked, but I didn't show it. I calmly signed the papers. Inside, I felt relieved, but inwardly, I couldn't help but chuckle at how much she misunderstood. She didn't know anything about me. My name is Nancy, and I work from home as a freelance writer and editor. I used to work for a publishing company, so I've used that experience to keep a stable income. Even when I worked at the publishing company, it was normal to work late or on weekends, but the pay was good, and with salary bonuses and rewards from copyrights, I saved a lot. Despite the ups and downs of freelancing, I've been able to live comfortably. I met my husband Dylan while we both worked at the publishing company. He was an aspiring writer, and I supported his passion. Eventually, our appreciation for each other turned into love, and we got married. At first, our marriage was fulfilling. We supported each other's careers. After we got married, I switched to freelancing from home. Until then, I believed that both my husband and in-laws understood and appreciated my work and income. But over time, it seemed like they misunderstood my work more and more. My in-laws held traditional values from their generation. Working from home wasn't common for them, and they saw freelancing as unstable compared to my husband's regular job. So they didn't value my work as much. Additionally, Dylan began boasting to his parents about his success as a renowned writer. Because of this, my in-laws' cold attitude towards me intensified. Every time we met, they'd make sarcastic remarks like, "Oh, well, look, it's Nancy, who doesn't seem to work much. What brings you here today? Looking for a job recommendation?" I tried to reassure my mother-in-law about our financial situation, saying, "If you're concerned about our living expenses, I apologize, but I'm earning well, so there's no need to worry." But she responded sarcastically, implying that I should be more grateful to Dylan, because without him, I'd be in trouble. My mother-in-law had traditional values from her generation, where women typically managed the household while men worked outside. Seeing me work from home, she likely assumed I was avoiding housework. This story highlights the differences in generations and cultures. as well as the misunderstandings and challenges within a family. Mother-in-law. Freelancing means that you can earn a good income even without going to an office and working from home. Nowadays, with technological advancements, we can work from anywhere, and my job falls into that category. However, my mother-in-law responded angrily, accusing me of talking back and calling me an unpleasant daughter-in-law. She insisted that it wasn't natural for a young woman to spend her days messing around with a computer at home. These kinds of conversations have been happening more often lately, and I was honestly getting tired of it. I bit back my retort, thinking, not this topic again. In reality, I was the main breadwinner and handled most of the housework, but I didn't say it out loud. At first, her complaints only came up when Dylan wasn't around, but recently, she'd been openly criticizing me, especially during family dinners at her house. It felt more like a session to criticize me than anything else. Despite being invited, only Dylan's portion of food would be on the table, and there was no seat for me, making it very uncomfortable. Moreover, I heard unpleasant comments from her and my father-in-law about me to other relatives. I was often surprised and hurt by their attitudes, but what irritated me more was Dylan's silence. They saw Dylan as a successful author and relied on him for money, often asking him to buy things. This was funded by the money I earned. Initially, it was a small amount, but lately we were spending almost $2,000 monthly for his parents. I decided to talk to Dylan about it. I told him I wanted him to stop giving my earnings to his parents without asking me first. But his response was colder than I expected. He said, "You're earning money while relaxing at home, right? It's easy money. So why not let my parents use a bit of it?" I was shocked by his words. It felt like the last straw. I felt betrayed, confused, and sad. Even though we faced challenges with his parents and our different backgrounds, I believed Dylan was on my side. That reassurance shattered with his words. Dylan, who I thought understood my feelings and efforts, ended up joining those who mocked me behind my back. I remembered our first date, when he passionately talked about his work, shared dreams, and values. I was drawn to his enthusiasm and sincerity, but lately he seemed to have forgotten his dreams and passion, spending his days aimlessly, often engrossed in games. This was completely different from the person he was when we first met. Games aren't inherently bad, but his obsession made him neglect his passion for writing, which saddened and angered me. I started questioning if I should continue my future with Dylan. If our relationship continued, what would become of my life? Even when I tried to imagine a future with him, I could only see a bleak future. So I decided to divorce him and secretly began looking for a new place to live. I searched online for apartments suitable for singles and visited a few properties for viewing. I focused on apartments with a quiet living environment and strong security. Finally, I decided on one property. One day, when Dylan, who usually played games in his room, was out, my mother-in-law visited. I was surprised by her sudden visit, so I opened the door without waiting. She sat on the living room sofa and bluntly said, "Nancy, you should leave this place." I was too shocked to respond. "What are you saying all of a sudden?" I asked. "Isn't it obvious? You're bad at housework, and even after Dylan became a popular author, you haven't changed. Above all, you can't even work properly," she said. "But I've told you many times that it's a misunderstanding, haven't I?" I tried to explain, but my mother-in-law interrupted me, smiling gently. "I plan to live here and support. Dylan taking care of him is much better than looking after that noisy old lady." By noisy old lady, do you mean Dylan's grandmother? Yes, that woman who is technically my mother-in-law. Even though I've done so much for her, she always finds fault, shows no gratitude, and I'm fed up. If I live here, I can take care of Dylan, and he can focus on his work without any hindrance. Isn't that wonderful? With that, she pulled out a piece of paper from the envelope she held. "So, would you please leave this house immediately?" As I listened to her words, I accepted the divorce papers she held out. They had been signed by Dylan. "Did Dylan really sign this?" I asked. "A little while ago, I suggested to Dylan that it might be better for both of you to get a divorce. It seems he was fed up with you too because he signed it without hesitation, she said with a playful tone. Everything that followed happened so quickly. I took my pre-packed bags and promptly decided to move to a new apartment. During the move, I also managed to file the divorce papers, and a new life began. My new life was smoother and more comfortable than I had expected. My small apartment had only essential furniture and appliances, and its simplicity seemed to boost my focus. I was free from complications, and each day was calm and peaceful. I'd wake up to natural light streaming in through the window and the sound of birds chirping in the distance. I could get up whenever I wanted, eat breakfast, and plan my day. When I started working, I'd get so engrossed that time would fly by. It felt heavenly not having to worry about the gaze and expectations of Dylan and my parents-in-law, and to be able to work at my own pace. One day, as I was engrossed in work at my desk, my smartphone vibrated. It was a call from Dylan. I hesitated but decided to answer. "Nancy, please come back right now," a desperate Dylan pleaded. "Why would you want me to come back all of a sudden?" I asked. To be honest, my parents found out I lied about being a popular author. I'm under immense pressure now. They're even talking about moving in, expecting to live off my earnings. So please, can you come back? I see. But returning isn't that simple. You chose to sign the divorce papers, didn't you? So did I. We're not on the same path anymore. So deal with your issues yourself. It's none of my business, I responded firmly. His voice was a mix of desperation and sadness. But I believe we should be together. Please come back. We've chosen different lives now, I said firmly. I could hear Dylan taking a deep breath on the other end. I understand. But since the divorce, there have been many troubles, and it's costing me a lot. I need assistance with expenses like the care fees for our parents and compensations for the chaos it caused. Why are you suddenly talking about this? I think your decisions played a part in ruining all of my plans. How dare you? Remember when we were married, how you and your parents mocked me? I didn't want to say this, but now you seem like an enemy. Your financial troubles arise because you don't work properly. Find another way to sort it out. I wish you wouldn't rely on me for everything, I said, feeling a mix of frustration and anger. With that, I ended the call. Despite numerous subsequent calls from Dylan, I blocked him and changed my number. A few months later, I happened to pass by where his house used to be. Instead of his house, there was now just an empty land. A nearby resident told me about the recent disputes at his place, with the police getting involved at times. The neighbor's words seemed to contain all the emotions of the situation. "You must have gone through a lot too. There must have been a lot of turmoil leading to the loss of his house." I stood there for a while, reflecting on our past. The unexpected outcome might be some kind of karma. Dylan's little lie had such a significant impact, more unbelievable than any story he might have written. From then on, I pledged to myself to live honestly, expressing my feelings and thoughts without lies or pretense, no matter how challenging things get. I recognized the importance of conveying the truth and cherishing genuine feelings. My husband got upset when he saw the remittance to my mom was only $670. "Look at your mom's account," I told him plainly. "My name is Penelope. I'm 42, and I work part-time at a supermarket. I have 2 sons, Ethan in 8th grade and Leo in 6th grade. My husband, Asher, is 43. His mother, my mother-in-law, is 67 and lives alone since her husband passed away. She gets a small pension, but it's not much. When my father-in-law died, we talked about supporting my mother-in-law since she raised Asher and might need help in the future. We decided I would send her $335 every month, treating it like caregiving. We recently paid off the house loan, and Asher's late father left behind $200,000, which Asher agreed to give entirely to his mom as per his father's will. I thought we could manage without income, but my mother-in-law called, upset about the allowance. She couldn't save because she couldn't go to cheaper stores due to COVID. Asher suggested he could buy things for her on his way home from work. But she explained it wasn't just groceries. It was everyday items, so it's not just about buying food, huh? Okay, then I'll go to the specific store for everyday items as well, I said. My mother-in-law exclaimed, honestly, do I have to spell it out this much for you to understand? It's not just everyday items and groceries, is it? Things like hair dye to cover gray hair too. That as well. She shouted, basically saying, please don't make me explain everything. I'm saying that the allowance isn't enough. I'm sorry, Mother. My husband's body language seemed overly apologetic towards his mother over the phone. For now, I'll increase it to $670, he said without consulting me. Huh? $670 is quite a significant amount. I couldn't hide my surprise at the decision made without my consent. Speaking of $670, it's almost like taking all of my part-time job earnings. Plus, our older child will be taking entrance exams soon, and we can't skip on sending them to cram school. I asked the store manager to increase my part-time hours, but in doing so, it became challenging to manage the household. I explained to my husband, Mom, you're never home at night. My younger child complained. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mom is working hard to earn money for us. I replied, feeling guilty that I couldn't even talk about a cool piggy bank my child made. I made a really cool piggy bank today and got praised for it. But I can't even talk about that now. My child banged on the table, upset. I'm sorry, I'll buy the toy you wanted for your birthday, so I'll work hard for that, I reassured my child. At that moment, my husband walked by, saying, just be patient with the toy. Grandma is making even more sacrifices and going through tough times. Your mother isn't working for the sake of your toys, she's working for your grandmother. His words left me confused. Strangely, our younger child remained and patted my shoulder. Mom, you're doing your best. I can't wait for the toy, so don't worry, my child comforted me. However, that wavering feeling was once again compounded by my mother-in-law. Have you received the envelope? She asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I replied, sensing what she meant. Today, I received an envelope from her. When I opened it, it contained a copy of a bank statement. I immediately looked at the remaining balance. Huh, $6? It's already less than $10, I said unintentionally. My mother-in-law seemed to understand that I had seen the contents of the envelope, and her voice quivered with tears. And then, due to the price increases, I can't even pay the electricity and gas bills, she sobbed. But I tried to continue speaking while looking at the statement. Then enough. All you do is talk about do this, do that, spouting off about useless things and dragging your feet. Last time, too, it was all about doing errands for household items and groceries, and they were useless solutions. That's why I called at this hour. You're there, aren't you, Asher? Take over for me, she said. From the phone conversation, my husband had already come close and said, Mom, let me take over, as he took the receiver from me. Yeah. After this exchange, Asher said, oh no, letting her use up the entire inheritance, letting the balance drop below $10. I'm sorry, I think this is definitely a misfortune for my humble parents. Yeah, I understand. So, starting from next month, if I send $2,000 each month, will that be okay? He blurted it out. $2,000? How on earth could the allowance amount be that much? I stood there in shock as I listened. After he hung up the phone, Asher exclaimed, Why is the allowance for Mom only $670? I told you, at least $670. I thought you had increased it, he shouted angrily. But you see inside that envelope. I tried to make a counterargument, but he interrupted me and continued, I told you, I owe her for raising me. In the future, she'll probably become weaker. If you think of it as caregiving expenses, why is it that my mother is in such a heartbreaking situation? He further escalated his outburst with a louder voice. I was at my limit too. Even the $335 allowance wasn't easy to manage. I thought it was an accomplishment to increase it to $670. I also increased my part-time hours to cope with the situation. I even learned how to cook more budget-friendly meals than before. I managed the household expenses with all of those efforts. But my efforts alone weren't enough, and there were sacrifices I made in return, like the time with my children. Yeah, on top of it all, an additional $2,000, and what's more, without even looking at how our allowances are being used in my mother-in-law's bank statement. She scolded me abruptly and decided on a $2,000 allowance without consulting me. Above all, I'm working for the sake of my sons, not for my mother-in-law. That's enough. A deeply cold voice came from me. I realized that when a person gets too angry, their voice becomes quiet. What do you mean it's fine? Are you getting defensive now? In a somewhat mocking tone, my husband looked down on me. I was no longer willing to yield to my husband's words. After having seen a copy of that statement, I absolutely couldn't accept such a ridiculous proposal as a $2,000 allowance. I've had enough of a son who blindly believes and supports a money-seeking mother and grandmother. People who can't prioritize our family don't belong here. Get out if you want to support your mother so badly, then go live with her. You can happily go to hell together. I pushed my husband firmly. Then I kicked him out the front door. And this, I walked my husband out the front door. I shoved the envelope in his face. I'll send your belongings back, and you'll cover the shipping. Take a close look at the contents of your mother's bank statement. Huh? My husband asked in response, but I just closed the door with a laugh. Bang. What's going on, Mom? Hearing the commotion, our two children came downstairs. Well, you two, your father said he wants to spend more money on you. And he asked Grandma to spend more too. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I said to the children, I see. If you decided this, Mom, it must be for the best for this house. I'll follow your lead, my older child said. Well, that toy. I'll wait for it until I'm an adult, no matter how many years it takes, so I'll cheer up. My younger son said to me, Thank you, my sons. 1 week later, help me, my husband called me. What about? I replied coldly. Could you at least listen to my story? He stammered. But my husband keeps going, clinging to his speech. I had to stifle my laughter on the phone. I can't believe that you would believe your mother wholeheartedly and then blur out such an outrageous proposal. I can't believe you're calling me now and wanting to get back together. You really have no idea how praising you are, huh? That's just how you are. You're the type who, in moments like this, says huh and questions everything, oblivious to your own indecisiveness. You casually involve others. When pointed out, you react as if it's unexpected. Well, but I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have one final conversation. I want to deliver those last words in person. It's important for the children, and closure matters. I have agreed to meet with my husband in this house. Oh, and make sure to bring all of your mother's credit card statements. Okay, at that moment, my husband and mother-in-law arrived, their lives in disarray. I'm sure I thought this was going to be an absolute bust. If you just calmed down and looked at the statement, you'd have figured it out, I said. You insulted me outright and ended up believing your mother, didn't you? I responded nonchalantly. So, can you show me the statement? My husband put the statement out on the table with trembling hands, and while looking down at it, I asked, What have you learned? And then my mom, she used the money I sent her for electricity, gas, food. It wasn't just for living expenses, he said in a voice barely louder than a mosquito's buzz. It wasn't just for living expenses, was it? Actually, the other purpose was the main one, right? Please say it with your own mouth. She was a member of an escort club. I'll actually get my husband to say it, his withered confession accompanied by my mother-in-law's trembling lips. I was absolutely delighted, and I couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Your mother, whom you believed more than me, was a woman who spent money on male escorts while lying about not being able to pay the increased electricity and gas bills, and came begging to her own son. The statement showed the name of an escort club, Romeo, followed by high-end restaurants and bars. She was spending over $40,000 a month. After a good laugh, I took a sip of cold water to cool down my head and then continued speaking. Even when you're nearly 70 years old, how could you pick a young, handsome guy at an escort club and take him around to all the high-end restaurants? I don't know how she got that way, and how did she end up begging for money at her own son's house? I'm really curious if she ended up addicted or something like that. I scratched at the wound and pride of my mother-in-law. Unexpectedly, my husband spoke. He told me he feels love for the princess who gives him an allowance. He even gives me presents. This made me blow out the water I had been drinking to cool my head. I ended up giggling and laughing. The water had gone to waste. Referring to a 67-year-old as a princess is quite something, isn't it? Well, by uttering words, some people fall for it, like my mother-in-law becoming like a man's personal ATM. So they'll keep saying those words, won't they? However, I took another sip of water. If you're giving an escort guy an allowance, you must be withdrawing a considerable amount, right? It wasn't my mother-in-law who visibly shuddered. Huh. The voice that uttered this was indeed my husband's. I placed a piece of paper on the table. It was a business card with a handwritten message. It was fun meeting you today. I love you. Please request me again. Huh? My husband stared at the business card on the table. I didn't expect to be kicked out of the house all of a sudden. I didn't even tidy up my own room, did I? I found your stuff while I was cleaning up your things. Even the strange money deductions. It all makes sense now, he said. Yes, that's right. So it's not just my fault. My mother-in-law shouted in a loud voice. There was a glass of lemonade in front of her, but she hadn't touched it at all. It might be expected since she had been continuously blamed. However, as the target of blame shifted, she attempted an unexpected turnaround. What? My husband's voice trembled as he reacted to this blow. But because I've been laughed at this much, am I the only one being ridiculous? Isn't that so unfair? No, just wait a minute. You're making me spend this much money, and now you're saying this. That's my line. Asking for money because your allowance isn't enough. I can't believe you're into escort girls too. Like parent, like child. Must be an annoying way to spend money. It's over now, isn't it? Both of you are done, I said. At my words, both my husband and mother-in-law had no words left. Enough is enough. I called the children on the second floor. Come down for a minute. The two children came down. We're parting ways because your dad and grandma have been spending too much money on themselves until now, I said. Your dad has been spending a lot of money on another woman, and your grandma has been spending a lot of money on a younger man. They want even more, I explained candidly. Hold on, don't say that in front of the kids. My husband tried to intervene. No, if we're using money like that, Mom will have no choice but to say something. I don't like you, Dad, trying to hide things, the older child continued. I mean, giving money to other people and then saying there's no money for toys. Don't mess around. I might be okay without toys, but my big brother probably has tutoring fees to pay, the younger one said. That's right, that's right. You see, I want to use the money for your future. Now say goodbye to people who spend their money on strangers, I said. On hearing my words, my older child said, it's goodbye for us too. And my younger child said, I'll learn to do without toys. It's despicable that he spent money on something other than you, Mom. In the end, it was only natural, but I cut ties with both my husband and my mother-in-law. I got a large amount of alimony because of the divorce due to my husband and mother-in-law's spending. On the other hand, my husband and mother-in-law, who had once indulged in frivolous spending, were a regrettable case, and I could anticipate the consequences. They continued to indulge until they hit rock bottom. As a result, it seems they accumulated debts to the extent that they had to let go of the house, even though they have to pay both alimony and child support. What on earth are they doing? Of course, I have no intention of making concessions. I expect them to pay in full. I continued to work part-time after that. We couldn't afford many luxuries, but somehow the three of us managed to lead a decent life. It's modest, but I want to do what I can for the children. I hope to continue living harmoniously with the three of us in the future. My name is Gloria, and ever since I was a kid, I'd always had a lot of energy. I never missed a day of school, from when I was little all the way through high school. Even after I turned 20 and started working, I managed to stay healthy without any major sicknesses until I turned 35. But when I hit 30, I noticed I wasn't as energetic as before. So I started exercising more and being careful about what I ate. Being positive since I was young helped me cope with things. But there was a time when I got really sick for the first time in my life, and it was tough. It even led to me getting a divorce. I felt like everything was falling apart, and I lost hope for a while. But now I've gotten better, and I've accepted what happened. When I turned 40, I started feeling strange. I'd get hot easily, feel out of breath even with small tasks, and get irritated over little things. At first, I thought it was just part of getting older, but it started affecting my life more. So I began to suspect something else might be wrong. Even though I was scared, my mother-in-law encouraged me to go to the hospital. Reluctantly, I went, and it turned out I had Graves' disease, a condition where my thyroid gland wasn't working properly. It caused symptoms like feeling hot, trouble sleeping, irritability, and weakness. It's more common in women, and if left untreated, it can lead to serious health problems. There's no complete cure, but I started treatment with medication from the hospital. The treatment didn't work right away, and I had to take time off from work to get better. Thankfully, my boss and coworkers were supportive. But sometimes, I'd worry that I'd never feel normal again and end up crying alone at night. My in-laws were always concerned about me. During weekdays when Orlando was at work, his parents would call to check on me, asking if I needed anything. Orlando's parents are really nice people. They've always been kind to me, especially after my illness was diagnosed. They made sure not to bother me too much, keeping phone calls short and never visiting without warning. I respect them a lot, almost like my own parents. But I tried not to show them how much I was struggling to avoid worrying them. However, Harriet, Orlando's mom, could see through my act. She told me it's normal to feel anxious about being sick, but nobody is to blame for it. She advised me to rest and focus on improving my health. She said the best way to do that is to rely on the people around me and cooperate with them. She even said they consider me like their own daughter and encouraged me not to hesitate to ask for help. Her words were so kind that they made me cry, but then Orlando, with his heartless words, made me wonder if he was really raised by such kind parents. Orlando and I didn't have any problems living together before my illness was discovered. But once I started feeling unwell, his attitude completely changed. Instead of being concerned, he acted as if I was a burden to him. I was too tired, both mentally and physically, to respond most of the time. There were days when I was too exhausted to even move. Of course, I had to ask him to buy groceries or eat out because I couldn't manage it myself. But whenever I asked, Orlando would sigh heavily, showing his annoyance. He complained about having to eat fast food because I couldn't cook. It seemed like his way of making things difficult for me, knowing I was too sick to cook. He often brought fried chicken, insisting that I needed to eat to regain my strength. I understood his reasoning, but when I couldn't eat, he'd scold me for not appreciating his effort. If I couldn't keep up with the housework and there was dust, he'd yell at me for the dirty floors. And when I was well enough to cook and he tasted the food, he'd complain that it tasted different from usual, questioning my cooking skills or whether I was losing my sense of taste. He'd eat the food I cooked, but then retreat to his room without saying a word. I realized something had to change, so I tried talking to Orlando about my illness and the difficulties I was facing, hoping for his support. "You're really sick. I mean, you never even had a cold before, so suddenly being ill, I gotta say, it's hard to believe," he said skeptically. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, it's suspicious. You were always healthy, and now you're suddenly sick. I find it hard to trust," he replied. I raised my voice, feeling shocked. How can anyone predict getting sick? Even I was shocked. "But still, your illness has nothing to do with me. If housework is too hard, You can do it when you feel better. I married you thinking I wouldn't have to care for you in the future since you were always healthy. This feels like a betrayal, he said, laughing. Hearing him laugh, any remaining affection I had for him vanished. Orlando was never good with housework and wasn't very cooperative, but he was serious about his job and took care of the kids, so we managed. But I never expected him to be so indifferent, almost like it was someone else's problem. His hurtful words left me speechless, and I ended the conversation there. Later, he realized his mistake and apologized, but I ignored him. Our relationship completely broke down from that conversation. Determined not to rely on such a man, I pushed through the pain to do the housework. After finishing, I'd lock myself in the bedroom, avoiding Orlando as much as possible. At first, he tried to please me with flowers and cakes, but when he realized my feelings wouldn't change, he stopped trying. Then, in June of a certain year, when the weather was bad with continuous rain and low pressure making me feel worse than usual, Orlando said after returning from work, "There's a wedding next Saturday of a relative living out of state. My parents and I are planning to go, but with your condition and their long travel, you don't have to. It's an overnight trip, so we'll be back Sunday evening." Out-of-state relatives? Do you even have such relatives? I asked. We haven't met them much. It's natural to keep in touch just because we're family. You wouldn't understand since you don't have parents, he replied, getting a little angry. But that's just how it is, he said in a slightly mocking tone, and I finally got angry. Actually, I don't have parents. My parents divorced when I was young. I don't know my dad, and my mom raised me alone. Her struggles took a toll, and she passed away when I was 30. So it's true. I don't have parents, but I'm not completely alone in the world. Orlando knows this, yet he said that, and I got incredibly angry. Don't you have any sensitivity? I thought. Orlando seemed taken aback by my fury. He tried to pass it off as a joke, but I yelled, "There are things you just don't joke about." I was so angry that I exhausted myself, eventually just lying down. Orlando seemed a bit concerned, but he was busy preparing for a wedding we were supposed to attend. I was in no shape to go, so I asked if we could skip it. He flatly refused, saying, "Absolutely not." When I asked why, he said, "I don't know the couple well, but their parents have been a big help to my family for years. My dad told me they helped us financially in the past. We can't miss their child's wedding. I'm sorry, but I have to prioritize this." He said it lightly, so he clearly didn't feel bad. In the end, Orlando left me behind with a suitcase and hat. He even warned me not to contact him during the wedding, saying it would be rude. "If something happens, just call an ambulance or something," he said. This guy's hopeless, I thought. When he returns, we'll need to have a serious talk. I watched him leave without a word, thinking this would be the last time. But surprisingly, I felt lighter with Orlando gone. I even cracked a smile. Now, with a whole day to myself, what should I do? I decided to relax for a few hours since I had no plans. Just as I was dozing off, the doorbell rang suddenly. It was around noon. I checked the monitor, and to my surprise, Harriet, who shouldn't have been here, was standing there. I panicked and rushed to the door. Harriet looked worried and asked, "Are you okay?" I was so shocked that I could only utter a confused "huh." Harriet said she heard I was unwell from who, I asked. "Orlando," she replied. Then I asked her about the wedding, to which Harriet responded, "What wedding?" We stared at each other in silence, then decided to talk inside over tea. I asked her what brings her here today. She said she recently bought a shelf, but Palmer hurt his back. She called Orlando to help assemble it, but he said he was busy this Saturday and suggested next week. When I asked Harriet why she came, she told me Orlando said he was going out of state for a friend's funeral. I asked about me, and he said I was unwell and bedridden. I offered to take care of me or check on me, but he said it might make me feel worse, so it's best to leave me alone. Harriet was worried about leaving someone so sick alone, especially when Orlando said I was in bad shape. I was stunned by this completely different story. With trembling lips, I told her the reason Orlando gave me for leaving. Harriet was equally shocked, saying she had no idea. After a silent pause, I resignedly said, "Maybe he's with another woman." Harriet's demeanor changed drastically. Hearing her calmly say, "That bastard won't get away with this," was terrifying. After an infuriated Harriet asked if I could come to the house now, I was taken to the in-law house where Palmer, who was house-sitting, was. Palmer, understanding the situation, also got furious. He tried calling Orlando, but as expected, couldn't reach him. Palmer started getting annoyed and declared, "I'm going to where he is right now." Of course, I stopped him, and after several attempts, finally got through to Orlando. I had put the call on speakerphone, and Orlando, in a deliberately soft voice, said, "I'm in the middle of a funeral right now. I'll call you back later." Palmer immediately retorted, "What do you mean forgetting us at the wedding?" Orlando responded foolishly, "What, huh?" in a rather loud voice. Hearing this, Palmer said, "You're speaking so loudly at a funeral." "Well, I guess it's not a funeral. That's why you can talk like that calmly." But Orlando sounded shaken over the phone. Pressing Orlando further, Palmer said, "You told Gloria it was a wedding, right? But it's strange. I don't remember ever borrowing money from relatives." Orlando's excuses were all over the place, suggesting a misunderstanding, or that he intended to go to the wedding, but prioritized a coinciding funeral instead. Palmer, tired of Orlando's excuses, exclaimed, "Enough already. I know all about your lies. There's no point talking over the phone. Just come back now. I'll listen to your excuses here, but I'm not forgiving you." I, too, was a bit scared listening to Palmer's rage. Orlando seemed to feel the same, but said he couldn't come back right away. When he mentioned bringing me home, I interjected, "I'm right here, though." He exclaimed in surprise, "Huh." As he kept making nonsensical excuses, I said, "Like Palmer said, there's nothing we can do over the phone. Come back now. There's no point talking about it here." Without listening to any more of Orlando's excuses, I hung up the phone. After that incident, I thought about going back home, but my in-laws were worried about leaving me alone. So I decided to stay at their place during that time. Harriet asked me what I was planning to do about Orlando. I told her that I was definitely getting a divorce. It's just not working out anymore. Then, the next day, even though Orlando said he would be back by evening, he returned around 10 in the morning, looking incredibly awkward, and meeting with all four of us started immediately, and as expected, Orlando had gone on a cheating trip. He was with a woman in her 20s whom he had picked up at a bar. They hit it off after some light flirting and ended up having a relationship. This trip was apparently planned at her request. After hearing this, I asked him why he lied about something that involved his parents. He said he thought it would be troublesome if his affair was discovered while he was away, especially to his parents. Palmer, my father-in-law, was furious. He scolded Orlando, saying, "You stupid son," not just because Orlando betrayed his wife, but also because he used the excuse of someone's death and his parents for his infidelity. Orlando, who's always been unable to go against his parents, especially Palmer, kept apologizing. But Palmer told him he was apologizing to the wrong person. Orlando then hurriedly apologized to me, but such a cheap apology was not enough for forgiveness. When I said we were getting a divorce, Orlando begged me not to, promising to change his ways. However, I told him, "The way you treated and spoke to me when you learned about my illness was bad enough. But to think you would also cheat, I cannot forgive a man like that. Even if we tried to rebuild our relationship now, you might do the same or worse if you got sick. I don't want to become such a terrible person, so let's get divorced." He kept apologizing, ignoring what I said. I told him it's unforgivable, but he continued to apologize. So I got fed up, and eventually, Palmer kicked him out. After that, with the help of my parents-in-law, we started divorce proceedings with a lawyer. Surprisingly, the negotiations went smoothly and were settled without much trouble. However, the affair was only discovered by chance, and if Harry hadn't come, I would have never realized Orlando was cheating. There was almost no evidence of the affair, so the compensation from the other woman was very minimal. But receiving compensation was also a way to prove that the other party was at fault, so I accepted it, thinking it was enough to know that they were guilty. After all, who would want a man who cheats on a sick wife? Orlando was just seen as a wallet, and after everything was settled, he was dumped by his affair partner, which made me laugh. Even after divorcing Orlando, I kept in touch with my parents-in-law. Harriet visits me about twice a month at my new place, and I occasionally visit the in-laws' house. It's nice that we've kept our good relationship. Orlando was disowned by his parents and banned from their house. They were so angry and disgusted with him, saying, "You're no son of ours. We disown you. Go wherever you want." When Orlando heard this, he was shocked. He didn't expect to be disowned. He tried to come back once, thinking they were still family, but Palmer chased him off, saying, "Didn't I tell you not to come here?" and threw water on him. Harriet told me about it, but my parents-in-law always cared for me, so even though I was down for a while after the divorce, I got over it pretty quickly. My health has been improving since the divorce, and I'm planning to return to work soon. I still have to deal with medication and checkups for my illness, but I'll overcome it with my naturally positive attitude. My name is Olivia Johnson, and I'm 36 years old. I have a husband who is 3 years older than me, and we have a son in elementary school. 5 years ago, my husband had an accident that left him paralyzed from the waist down. He had to quit his job, which was really tough for him because he used to be the best salesman in his department. After the accident, he started getting angry with our son and me over small things. Sometimes he would only realize what he was doing when he saw our son crying. I learned to handle him better and told our son to stay away from his dad when I wasn't around. That helped to reduce the outbursts. Then I started working full-time to support our family. Even though I worked hard, I couldn't earn as much as my husband used to, so I took extra shifts whenever I could to make more money. It was tiring, but I thought I was doing it for my family. I didn't notice how much I was changing until a friend from high school pointed it out. She said I looked very different and much older than before. Her words hurt, but they were true. I used to care a lot about fashion and makeup, but now I focus on practical things and don't keep up with the latest trends. But even after realizing this, I don't have the luxury to enjoy fashion like I used to. Though I felt somewhat pessimistic, I reminded myself that this is only temporary. In a few weeks, our multi-generational home will be completed. The plan is for my family and my in-laws to live there. My in-laws suggested this to help lessen my load a bit. I felt bad about it, but I accepted their offer. My husband was also supportive of the idea. Since we decided on the multi-generational home, he's been in high spirits. He's usually quiet and hard to read, but lately he's been starting conversations with me and our son more often. Our son, not used to his dad talking to him, seems confused but also a bit happy. Before, my husband would yell at our son for reasons that didn't make sense, and our son became overly sensitive to his dad's mood. I had been struggling to improve their relationship, hoping that living in a duplex might help. But when our long-awaited duplex was finally completed, my husband told me he had something to discuss. He mentioned that my mother-in-law would also be present, and I had a bad feeling about it. Despite my apprehension, my husband began to speak with a smile on his face. "I can finally tell you, Olivia," he said. I was advised to keep silent until the duplex was finished, but I've been looking forward to this day. I was puzzled, not quite grasping what he was trying to convey. Then, with a casual tone, as if he were talking about today's weather, he said, "Olivia, let's get a divorce, and from now on, let's lead separate lives." It took me a few minutes to understand my husband's words. However, it seemed he took my silence as an agreement and triumphantly spread a divorce paper on the table. The document looked legitimate, with signatures from both him and my in-laws. Unable to accept the reality, I looked up, thinking it might be some kind of distasteful prank. But my husband's expression instantly crumbled that thought. I felt the determined resolve in his eyes, a promise to absolutely divorce me. Instinctively, I turned to my mother-in-law for support. But with an unreadable expression, she simply said, "Sign the paper." I felt betrayed. I thought things were going well with both my husband and my mother-in-law, but perhaps it was only me. Tears welled up as I bit my lower lip and looked down. Meanwhile, my husband continued to speak. "You could take our son, Olivia," he said. "He would be happier. Besides, with my health condition, it's impossible for me to take care of him." I cut him off. "Hold on. I never agreed to getting a divorce. You never said anything about this. You can't just decide all this on your own." I voiced my displeasure. During the brief silence, I asked, "First off, what do you plan to do without me? Do you realize how much I've supported you?" As soon as my husband heard these words, his expression changed. His face turned red, and he glared at me, yelling, "That's what I can't stand about you, your self-righteous way of talking. I didn't choose to be like this, yet you always look worn out, acting as if you're the only one suffering. I feel blamed every time. I'm fed up with you and your victim complex." I lost my words, hearing the true feelings of my husband. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. Seeing me crying, my husband looked annoyed and said, "See, you always play the victim, right, Mom? You'd agree that a wife like her who can't even respect her husband isn't suitable for me, right? Don't worry, my new partner is young and beautiful, and I'm sure you'll like her." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Finally, I understood the real reason why my husband wanted a divorce. He was having an affair, and he was trying to get rid of me, the obstacle to be with his mistress. I never thought my husband would cheat on me, not because of his personality, but because I thought there was no chance for him to meet someone else. But I was wrong. He told me how he met his mistress. He met her online, and through texting each other every day, they developed feelings and fell in love. Learning about this whole online dating thing was bewildering for me. Looking back, my husband had been glued to his phone recently. Moreover, when he was engrossed in his phone, he seemed to be in an exceptionally good mood, oblivious to my husband's affair. I would think to myself, it's nice to see him in a good mood today. Yet, for all I knew, he may have been secretly inviting that woman over to our place when I wasn't around. Just the thought of it was enough to make my blood boil. Despite our arguments, I had never once considered leaving him before. But now, after hearing his true feelings, I just couldn't imagine being with him any longer, even if he took back his words and said, "I don't want a divorce after all." I was now determined to leave him. As I made this decision, I heard a loud slap. Startled, I looked up to see my mother-in-law, her face twisted in an expression I had never seen before. My husband's cheek bore a red handprint. Realizing she had slapped him, I was taken aback. I would never have expected my mother-in-law to lay a hand on her son. She turned to me, deeply bowing her head in apology. "I'm really sorry. I apologize for letting you take care of such a despicable son." As she uttered these words, her face a mask of profound regret, my mother-in-law said, "Olivia, you're too good for my son. You've done so much for him, more than we could ever thank you for. My husband and I were looking forward to living with you too, but it seems you'll be better off without our son." She continued, "We will make sure you receive proper alimony and child support, so please go ahead and divorce him." My husband, his face beet red, tried to retort, but a glare from his mother shut him up. A different kind of tears welled up at my mother-in-law's words. They brought both relief and sadness. Regardless of my husband, I was saddened at the prospect of ending my relationship with my in-laws. Encouraged by my mother-in-law, I filled out the divorce papers. And just like that, my husband and I became strangers. After parting with him, I returned to my parents' house with my son. They said it was fine to stay with them until things settled down, so I decided to take them up on their offer. I planned to continue working as before, but discussed reducing my workload with my boss. I was considering changing jobs if needed, but my boss agreed to accommodate me without hesitation. To be honest, it took me by surprise. Apparently, my boss had been worried about my excessive workload for a while now. With a wry smile, he said, "I was actually worried you might collapse one day, but knowing your situation at home, I didn't say anything." Feeling guilty, I bowed my head and apologized to my boss for causing him concern. He quickly shook his head, saying, No, it's just me worrying too much. But thinking about it, it's good that you left your ex-husband." His words brought a smile to my face, and I nodded in agreement. I'd also told my coworkers about my divorce. I thought it would be better to let everyone know since I was reducing my workload. I was anxious about their reaction, but when I honestly told them the reason for my divorce, they threw a party for me. I was taken aback by this, but it was a relief that the atmosphere didn't become serious. Although I had awful luck with men, I had the best colleagues at my workplace. By the time all the paperwork had settled, I took our son and left my parents' home. We chose a small apartment as our new home. It was a far cry from the spacious house we were supposed to be living in, but our son didn't show any discontent. Perhaps because he no longer had to worry about his father, he became more vocal about his opinions, and his demeanor brightened. It was a change that made me truly appreciate our separation from my ex-husband. The effects of the separation were apparent in me too. By the time I'd finished unpacking after the move, a friend came to visit and celebrate our new home. The last time we met, she was concerned about my well-being, but when she saw me today, she laughed and said that I looked younger than ever. I couldn't help but laugh along. Everything started going smoothly, almost comically so, after the divorce. I suppose my old self was under so much stress, physically and mentally. Now I realized I was merely a maid for my ex-husband back then. I still can't forgive my ex-husband, and I don't want to see him, but I do meet my in-laws once a month now. A while ago, my son got a fever, but I absolutely couldn't take a day off of work that day. And to make matters worse, my parents weren't available either. Out of desperation, I reached out to my in-laws. They immediately came over to take care of my son. We used to barely communicate due to the situation with my ex-husband, but since that day, we make sure to meet at least once a month. They thanked me for letting them see their grandson, but I was grateful that they still loved my son even after the divorce. My son occasionally mentioned his grandparents, but he never said he wanted to see them, perhaps out of consideration for me. However, he did ask how they were doing. After all, they were his beloved grandparents. To be honest, I didn't want to take his grandparents away from him, so it was a relief to know they wanted to see him too. By the way, my son never once mentioned my ex-husband. Even my in-laws knew that we didn't want to see him. However, my ex-husband had a different idea. I was utterly surprised when I heard from my mother-in-law that my ex-husband was considering getting back with us. I thought that things were going well with his mistress. According to my mother-in-law, the mistress moved in shortly after we left. It seemed like they had it all planned out. The mistress was delighted to see the new house and moved in without even getting permission from my in-laws. They were taken aback, but decided to act as if my ex-husband and his new partner didn't exist. At first, the mistress seemed pleased with the minimal interaction with my in-laws, but soon she started showing signs of discontent. Apparently, she thought that my in-laws would be helping with the household chores. She complained about it to my ex-husband. He then said to his parents, "What's this all about? Didn't you promise to help with the housework?" To this, my mother-in-law replied, "We did promise, but that was with Olivia, not with you two." And she ignored anything he said after that. Left with no choice, my ex-husband tried to get the mistress to do everything that I used to do. At first, she reluctantly did as told, but every complaint from my ex-husband caused more strain between them. Eventually, his mistress had enough and left the house, slamming the divorce papers at my ex-husband. I thought to myself, my ex is pretty bad, but that mistress is quite something too. My mother-in-law, with a bitter smile, commented that my ex-husband's behavior afterwards was the real problem. He refused to admit that he was at fault and blamed his mistress for getting dumped by saying that he got tricked by her. Furthermore, there was no one left to take care of my ex now that his mistress was gone. He couldn't rely on my in-laws either. As a result, for some reason, he thought that if we reconciled, everything would return to how it was. He probably has forgotten the things he did. He told my in-laws that he wanted to get back together with me and asked for their help. When I heard about this, I couldn't help but shudder at the thought of living with my ex again. My mother-in-law quickly reassured me, saying, "Don't worry," we firmly refused. My ex, scolded by my in-laws, gave up on seeing me but now wanted to see our son. My in-laws also refused this. Finally, my in-laws told my ex that if he caused any more trouble to me or our son, they would sever family ties and kick him out. This finally made him give up. It would be difficult for my ex, who was well received by his neighbors and friends, to live relying on others besides his family. I'm glad that my in-laws are not on my ex's side. From now on, I plan to make good use of my past experiences and do my best without pushing myself too hard. I'd also want to cherish the time with my son and make lots of memories that we couldn't before. I'm a 49-year-old man, and I've been married to my wife, who is 48 years old, for almost 25 years. We've been together since we were in high school. I always knew I wanted to marry her. We have a 24-year-old daughter. Like any married couple, we've had good times and bad times, but mostly good. My wife is shy and sweet, just like me. But recently, we had a big fight, and she's been acting strange since then. The fight was about something weird, and I don't understand why she got so upset about it. I have a niece who is a little younger than my daughter, around 22 years old. She's the daughter of my older brother, who was 6 years older than me. We were very close growing up. Sadly, my brother passed away 2 years ago in an accident. It was really hard for all of us, especially for my niece, my sister-in-law, and me. For a year after his death, I visited them every weekend with my daughter to check on them. I wanted my wife to come too, but she always had an excuse. So I stopped asking her to come. My wife said she didn't want to intrude on our grief because she wasn't close to my brother, and she would feel awkward and insincere. But I don't think that's a good reason. I didn't push my wife further to join us, but over time, my sister-in-law and I became even closer. I tried to comfort my niece, who was feeling the loss of her father deeply. I felt terrible for her because she was around the same age as my own daughter, and I couldn't imagine how hard it would be for her if I were suddenly gone. So I did my best to support her and be there for her. I think she started to see me as a father figure because recently she asked me to walk her down the aisle at her wedding, which is in 3 weeks. To be honest, I always thought my niece might ask me to walk her down the aisle, and I knew I would say yes without hesitation. It would be an honor, and I believed it's what my late brother would have wanted. So when she asked, I immediately agreed. I assumed my wife would be happy about it too, as she seemed to like my niece. But when I told her, she completely lost it. She started yelling, saying that walking a bride down the aisle is a sacred moment only meant for fathers and daughters, not uncles and nieces. She implied that I was trying to take my brother's place, which I found really hurtful. She even accused me of being selfish and not considering how our own daughter would feel knowing I was walking my niece instead of her. I don't agree with her at all. My wife's sudden outburst was completely unexpected and unlike her usual self. I was so taken aback by her behavior that I didn't know how to respond. I just let her yell at me without defending myself because her words hurt, especially when she accused me of trying to replace my brother. After she finished, I retreated to the guest room and stayed there for a couple of hours. She didn't try to talk to me or apologize, which made me feel even worse. I didn't think any of this was my fault. If she had a problem with my decision, she could have talked to me calmly instead of yelling and making accusations. Although her reaction was extreme, she did raise a valid point about our daughter. She and my niece are close friends, and our daughter was supposed to be her maid of honor at the wedding. I hadn't considered how she might feel about me walking my niece down the aisle before her, despite their friendship. After the fight, once I had calmed down, I decided to check in with my daughter to see how she felt about me walking my niece down the aisle. When I called her, she was excited and said she was glad I agreed. Surprisingly, she already knew about my niece asking me and had given her approval because that's what she thought her uncle would have wanted. I was relieved that my daughter was okay with it, as it showed how close they were, just like my brother and I were. Knowing that my daughter was fine with it reassured me that there was nothing wrong with my decision. My wife's reaction seemed baseless and really hurtful, considering the situation. Feeling frustrated by my wife's reaction, I decided to talk to her about it during dinner. I explained how my daughter was okay with me walking my niece down the aisle, so I planned to go ahead with it. I also mentioned that her comment about me replacing my brother was insensitive, and I expected an apology. However, instead of apologizing, she stuck to her earlier statements, which was shocking. Although she didn't yell this time, we still ended up in a heated argument. Things escalated when she said she would leave me if I walked my niece down the aisle. I was stunned and didn't know how to respond. We haven't spoken for 3 days now because neither of us wants to admit fault. I don't think I did anything wrong. Wanting to walk my niece down the aisle isn't wrong, especially when my daughter doesn't mind it. My wife's argument about it being only for fathers and daughters doesn't hold up, in my opinion. However, I don't want to lose my wife over this. I love her deeply, and these past few days have been tough for both of us. I can't imagine life without her, and I'd be devastated if she left. I'm not sure how we're going to resolve this, but I'm open to any advice or opinions. Am I wrong for wanting to walk my niece down the aisle despite my wife's opposition? Update 1. It's been 5 days since our big fight, and we still haven't spoken to each other. We're both living in the same house, but it feels like there's an invisible barrier between us. Whenever I enter a room, she leaves, and vice versa. It's really tough, and I know she's feeling bad too. I heard her crying in the bedroom last night, and it broke my heart. I wanted to go and comfort her, but I didn't know how to. We've had fights before, but nothing as serious as this. It just really sucks. I'm going to give it one more day, and then I'll talk to her myself. I can't stand this distance and bitterness anymore. I want things to go back to normal between us. Update 2. Today, I planned to talk to my wife, but she surprised me by bringing me breakfast in bed. I was completely stunned after almost 6 days of not speaking to each other. I was still groggy from just waking up, so it was hard to process everything. Her gesture threw me off guard, especially after days of fighting and ignoring each other. She apologized to me for the hurtful remark she made about me wanting to replace my brother. She admitted she regretted saying it as soon as it left her mouth. She explained that she was just so angry that she didn't think things through. When I asked her what exactly she was mad about, she tensed up a bit, and I noticed. She promised to tell me the reason later. She wasn't ready to share the reason with me yet. Clearly, she was embarrassed about it, but I couldn't understand what could be so embarrassing. It must have been something serious. Even though she hadn't told me the reason, she promised she would soon. She explained that she's been carrying this secret for years. I'm really curious about it, and I even tried to convince her to tell me, but she asked me not to pressure her. So, I respected her request and didn't push harder. Despite that, it's been a good day, and I didn't want to ruin it by starting another fight. I'm just glad that my wife and I are talking again. She means everything to me, and I can't imagine life without her by my side. She apologized for threatening to leave me, admitting that she would be miserable without me. We've been together for over 3 decades, which is a very long time. Regardless of her reason, I know I'll forgive her, and she would do the same for me. I understand that some people might not agree with me, but I know my wife better than anyone else. Whatever the reason may be, I'll accept it. All I want is to be with her for the rest of my life, no matter what challenges come our way. That's all that matters to me. Update 3. Hey everyone. It's been 2 days since the last update, and today my wife finally told me the real reason she was so upset about my decision to walk my niece down the aisle. I'm still in shock. I can't believe she kept this secret for over 25 years just to maintain peace within the family. It's crazy. This whole issue wasn't even about my niece or my daughter. It was actually about my sister-in-law. For context, my sister-in-law, my wife, and I all went to the same high school. My wife and I have known each other since middle school and started dating in our freshman year. A few months after my wife and I started dating, she became friends with my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law and I weren't particularly close at first, even though she and my wife were good friends. It was only after she married my brother that she and I became friends. Before that, she was mainly friends with my wife. They were close through college as well, and my sister-in-law was even a bridesmaid at our wedding. That's where she first met my brother. However, after our wedding, my wife started distancing herself from my sister-in-law. The only reason my sister-in-law and I remained involved in each other's lives was because my wife had been friends with her. I don't think I would have kept in touch with my sister-in-law if it weren't for my wife. She's a nice person, but we weren't close back then. My brother married her a year after I married my wife, and 2 years after that, they had their daughter. Given how close my brother and I were, we often tried to organize playdates for our kids. However, my wife never seemed interested in spending time with my brother and his family. We would sometimes argue about it. She always said she was too tired or too busy, but I could tell she was just making excuses to avoid hanging out with them. So I started visiting my brother and his family without my wife, and she would get upset about that too. But sometimes I needed a break, and my daughter loved playing with her cousin. We didn't meet them very often, maybe once or twice every 2 weeks because they lived far away. I never forced my wife to come along since she clearly wasn't interested. When she did join us, she didn't talk much and mostly interacted with me, my brother, or the kids. No matter how hard we tried to make both our wives feel included, it never seemed to work out. My brother and I even tried to get them to tell us why they fell out, but both of them just said they had grown apart. And it was awkward to be around each other. Let's be real, growing apart hardly seems like a genuine reason to completely ignore someone you used to be close with. Especially since my sister-in-law didn't even ask my wife to be her bridesmaid at her wedding. So we knew something was really off. I was certain something had happened around the time of our wedding. However, life got busy. Our kids were growing up, and our responsibilities increased. We stopped seeing each other as often and stopped dwelling on what had happened years ago. We had bigger problems to worry about. But today, I finally learned what caused the tension between my wife and my sister-in-law. As I mentioned earlier, they used to be close friends, but things changed around the time of our wedding. The reason behind that was a couple of days before the wedding, when my wife and her bridesmaids were having a party just for themselves. My sister-in-law got blackout drunk and confessed that she'd been in love with me since sophomore year. She whispered it to my wife, who was horrified but didn't say anything at the time. My wife tried to dismiss it as a meaningless drunken confession, but the next day my sister-in-law admitted it was true but said she wouldn't act on it. Still, my wife let her be a bridesmaid because they didn't want to raise any questions. They just didn't want the hassle of explaining why my wife had removed her friend from the bridal party. However, things were never the same after that. They pretty much stopped talking. When my sister-in-law started dating my brother, my wife became insecure, believing she was only marrying into the family to be close to me. Unbeknownst to us, they even got into a nasty fight about this a few weeks before my brother's wedding. My wife accused my sister-in-law of marrying my brother just to be near me, as she believed that someone doesn't just get over feelings they had for so long in just a few months, especially when the person they're marrying is 6 years older. However, my sister-in-law insisted she truly loved my brother, and their marriage had nothing to do with the past. The fact that my brother and I looked similar didn't help the situation. That fight essentially ended any hope for reconciliation, and over time, the bitterness between them only grew. My wife never told me any of this because she didn't want to ruin my brother's marriage. She wasn't even sure if my sister-in-law still had feelings for me or not. It didn't feel that way to me either, and I guess my wife also believed that my sister-in-law truly loved my brother. That's why she decided to keep this secret, no matter how insecure she felt whenever she saw me spending time with my sister-in-law. Everything reached a breaking point last week when I told my wife about my decision to walk my niece down the aisle. She was already feeling insecure and jealous because I had been visiting my sister-in-law after my brother's death. But unlike before, instead of it being my brother, my sister-in-law, and me, it was just me and her. Those old, ugly feelings resurfaced, and she didn't know how to deal with them anymore. She tried to suppress them like before, but it wasn't as effective. When I came home and told her about walking my niece down the aisle, she couldn't shake the image of me, my sister-in-law, and my niece being one happy family from her mind. She couldn't even tell me the real reason behind her behavior, which was frustrating for her. As a result, she ended up saying things she shouldn't have. She knew I was assuming the responsibility out of love and respect for my brother, not because I reciprocated any feelings my sister-in-law had for me. All those years ago, my wife didn't know how to handle the overwhelming feelings she had built up inside her. These feelings resurfaced when she saw how my brother's passing brought me and my sister-in-law closer together. That was the real reason behind her reaction. I must have been silent for about 10 whole minutes after she finished telling me everything because it was a lot to process all at once. I couldn't even imagine how my wife had kept this huge secret to herself for the past 2 decades. It would have driven me crazy. She didn't want to disrupt my brother's home, so she kept the truth to herself all these years. I'm amazed by the incredible strength it must have taken for her to do that. My wife has always put other people's feelings before her own, and I'm proud to be married to her. When I thanked her for telling me the truth and for keeping the secret for so long, she broke down in my arms. I was there for her while she let herself cry for the first time in ages. I'm grateful that she finally told me everything. I don't care what the reason was, I'll stay with her no matter what. It's been a few hours, and we haven't spoken about it further. I think she's too emotionally drained right now, so I'll leave it for later. Update 4. Hey everyone. So there's just a week left before my niece's wedding, and yes, I am still going to walk her down the aisle. Now that everything's out in the open, my wife told me that she doesn't mind. She spent enough time with my niece herself, and she knows that my niece is a good kid who deserves to have a father figure on her special day. It's definitely what my brother would have wanted, so she's fine with it. As for my sister-in-law, we've decided to let sleeping dogs lie. We're never going to bring up the past, at least not by ourselves. My wife trusts me, and she knows I would never do anything to hurt her. She apologized for what she said in that fit of rage, and now that I know the reason behind her anger, I know better than to hold it against her. She also knows better than to hold my connection with my brother's family against me. I'll still help her and my niece whenever they need it. But that's about it. So, we're okay on that front. This secret is going to stay between us for the rest of our lives, and we know it's all for the best. We've also decided that my wife needs to seek therapy because she tends to bottle up her feelings until she finally snaps over something really insignificant. She's almost 50 now, and I think it's about time we address this because I don't want her to suffer anymore. She needs to understand that she doesn't always have to put on a brave face to face the world. She can be vulnerable, at least with me. I mean, she is sometimes, but usually only when things get too overwhelming. I want her to know that things don't have to reach that breaking point before she tells me about her problems. She agrees with me, and I'm glad we're on the same page here. We're in this for the long haul. My life seemed content, at least that's what I believed. Upon graduating from university, I landed a job at the company of my dreams. Shortly after, I met Ben, who would become my husband, and we tied the knot when I turned 25. Ben was not only financially stable, but also incredibly kind-hearted. 3 years into our marriage, our daughter Deborah, or Debbie as we fondly call her, came into our lives. Her arrival seemed perfectly timed, adding joy to our already blissful existence. As a 30-year-old homemaker, I decided to leave my job to focus on nurturing and caring for Debbie, a decision I never regretted. She was turning 2, her infectious laughter filling our home with happiness each day. Watching her grow was a source of immense joy for me. Ben, equally enamored by our daughter, dedicated his free time to her, allowing me moments of respite on weekends. Thanks to his unwavering support, I maintained a well-rounded life. However, this tranquil routine shattered one fateful weekend when my in-laws, Brian and Carol, unexpectedly visited. My encounters with Carol had been infrequent, and truth be told, I harbored some reservations about her. From the onset of our relationship, Carol's disapproval of me was evident. She questioned my suitability as her son's wife, making disparaging remarks about my upbringing. In response, I often engaged in heated exchanges with her, unable to tolerate her negativity. Yet Brian and Ben, averse to conflict, urged restraint, attempting to quell any confrontations. Right from the outset, Carol and I never seemed to see eye to eye. So when Brian and Carol unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep, I was taken aback. Despite my surprise, I had no choice but to welcome them inside. Brian, Carol, what brings you here? I inquired, puzzled by their unannounced visit. Are you daft? We informed you earlier that we'd be coming, Carol retorted sharply. Well, I'm sorry, I must have forgotten to tell you. My parents are visiting today. Ben interjected apologetically, his forgetfulness not uncommon. Frustrated by the oversight, I quickly prepared tea for everyone, attempting to salvage the situation. As we settled down, I inquired, how can we assist you today, Brian and Carol? Surprised by my lack of knowledge, Carol questioned, didn't you hear from Ben? I informed him earlier. Feeling a pang of irritation, I shot a glance at Ben, who appeared uncomfortable but proceeded to speak. Actually, I've been discussing with my parents, and we decided to move in with them. What? I exclaimed, caught off guard by the sudden announcement. Ben explained, with Dad's recent injury, I've been worried about him. Plus, considering their age, it might be best for us to live with them and take care of them. Shocked by Ben's unilateral decision, I struggled to comprehend. Just because you think it's a good idea doesn't mean you shouldn't discuss it with me. This is a significant decision. Ignoring my objections, Carol interjected. Flora, your opinion isn't relevant here. We're more concerned about what Ben thinks. Feeling sidelined in a decision that deeply affected us both, I insisted. This is a matter that concerns both husband and wife. Let Ben and I discuss it and come to a decision together. Carol shot me a disdainful look before storming out of our house for the day. Once they had left, I confronted Ben, my frustration evident. Why didn't you discuss this with me? Deciding something so significant without involving me is not right. I'm sorry, Flora. I was just worried about my dad. Ben apologized, but I wasn't appeased. Being concerned about your dad doesn't excuse ignoring me in such matters. I countered, emphasizing the importance of mutual decision-making. Realizing his mistake, Ben promised to involve me in future decisions. So, what do you think about moving in with my parents? He asked tentatively. Hesitating, I confessed, honestly, I'm not keen on the idea. You know Carol and I don't get along. Ben pleaded, is there any way you could reconsider? I'll do anything. Protect me from your mother. If you can't, we're headed for a divorce, I asserted firmly, expressing the severity of my discomfort. Ben, taken aback, agreed to shield me from Carol's hostility. With his promise, albeit reluctantly, I consented to the arrangement, with a firm resolve to leave if he failed to uphold his commitment. Weeks later, we moved in with Brian and Carol. As we entered, Carol greeted us with a backhanded remark, but Ben, emboldened by our agreement, stood up for me, demanding respect. Though surprised, Carol relented, offering hospitality. Witnessing Ben's support gave me hope that perhaps living with Carol wouldn't be as daunting as I feared. If he could stand up for me, perhaps we could navigate this arrangement together. After settling our luggage in our room, I joined Brian and Carol in the living room for tea when I heard the front door open. It was Alicia, my sister-in-law. I'm home, she announced cheerfully. Are Ben and his family coming over today? She asked Carol. Yes, that's what I told you yesterday, Carol replied. Confused, I wondered if Alicia was now living with us. I had thought she had her own place elsewhere. When I inquired about her living arrangements, Alicia casually mentioned that she had been back living with us for 3 months now, a fact Ben had failed to mention. Ben's oversight frustrated me deeply. I coldly glared at him, mentally noting it as strike one against him. 2 more strikes and he would be out. Apologizing for his forgetfulness, Ben's feeble excuse did little to assuage my annoyance. I resolved to have a serious conversation with him later. Life at Carol's house started as expected, with her asserting dominance and immediately assigning me tasks. "Flora, why haven't you cleaned?" she demanded one day. "I've cleaned my room," I retorted. "You haven't cleaned mine or Alicia's room, and the lawn needs mowing," she continued, disregarding my response. "Why should I have to do all of that?" I questioned. "Are you back talking to me? You should be grateful we're letting you stay here," she snapped. I reminded her that we were living there because of Brian's health concerns and that she had invited us. Alicia, siding with Carol, only added to my frustration. Determined to prove them wrong, I took on all the household chores, even mowing the lawn in the scorching heat. Meanwhile, Carol and Alicia played with Debbie, my daughter, without my consent. When Ben returned from work, I relayed everything to him, demanding he address their behavior. During dinner, despite my efforts, Alicia and Carol continued to complain about me, unfazed by my grievances. "What is this dish? It's too bland for my taste. I don't think I can finish it," complained Alicia, pushing her plate away. "I can't believe she's a housewife and a bad cook," remarked Carol, adding insult to injury. Ben, sensing the tension, intervened, putting down his utensils and addressing his mother and sister. "Hey, Alicia, Mom, please don't complain about the food. Flora made it for you to enjoy." Alicia retorted, "Ben, why are you defending your wife for this? Don't you have any dignity as a husband? Do you honestly think this food is good?" "I love Flora's cooking. It's delicious," Ben affirmed, attempting to defuse the situation. Watching Ben fail to stand up to Alicia's dominance, I felt a pang of disappointment. It was the second strike against him in my mind. Despite Ben's feeble defense, the bullying from Alicia and Carol persisted. Every day, they imposed numerous household chores and errands upon me, refusing to accept any objections. Carol even went as far as to assert, "A wife belongs to this family, so it's natural for her to work for the family. You should treat me the same as you treat Carol." Alicia echoed Carol's sentiments, implying that I must obey their commands without question. Frustrated by their unreasonable demands, I began plotting my escape from this oppressive environment, feeling increasingly certain that leaving their house was the only solution. Then, I received a call from my mother informing me that my father had suffered a stroke. While it wasn't severe, he was hospitalized. Hurriedly, I packed my bags to rush back and visit him at the hospital. As I was preparing to leave, Carol entered my room and questioned my actions. "Flora, what are you doing?" Apologizing, I explained, "My mother just called to tell me about my father's stroke. I need to visit him at the hospital." In response, Carol made an outrageous statement. "Who said you can leave? This is your home, and there's no other place for you." Feeling overwhelmed by Carol's demands and the toxic atmosphere, I reached my breaking point. Ignoring her, I left the house. At the hospital, I stayed with my parents for a few days, helping my mother with household tasks. During this time, Carol and Alicia incessantly called and left hostile messages, demanding my return. Their behavior fueled my anger, and thoughts of divorce and leaving Ben's house crossed my mind. Yet, fueled by resentment towards Carol and Alicia, I decided to take revenge. Preparing for revenge required careful planning. Despite my desire to avoid them, I returned to Carol's house. Even upon my return, Carol and Alicia continued to complain. Such nonsense. About 6 months later, during dinner, Carol excitedly announced, "He proposed to me. I'll bring him over for lunch next time." Feeling a surge of satisfaction, I realized the time for revenge had finally arrived. But my smile didn't go unnoticed by Alicia. "Flora, you're happy for me too, right?" Alicia remarked, misinterpreting my expression. A week later, Alicia brought her fiancé, Ken, to the house. Ken, an accomplished professional with a high income, appeared sincere and respectable. Alicia proudly introduced him to everyone, including me. Observing the scene, Carol seemed pleased and offered her blessings to the couple. Seizing the opportunity for revenge, I engaged Ken in conversation as I served tea. "So, will you be living with your parents after marriage?" I asked casually. "Oh, I haven't decided yet," Ken replied. "I'd heard there's a rule here that if your parents are over 60, you have to live with them," I continued. Surprised, Ken's expression changed. "There's no such rule in my family." I proceeded to inform Ken about the supposed rules and the mistreatment I endured from Alicia and Carol. Ken's discomfort grew evident. Unsure, Ken turned to Alicia for confirmation, but she dismissed my claims as jealousy. Determined to expose the truth, I played recordings of Alicia and Carol's bullying in front of everyone. Shocked and dismayed, Ken swiftly ended the engagement, leaving Alicia in tears. Feeling a sense of vindication, I packed my belongings and left the house with Debbie, leaving divorce papers for Ben. Despite Ben's attempts to reconcile, I stood firm in my decision, frustrated by his lack of support throughout our marriage. Later, I learned that both Ben and Alicia continued to leech off Carol without contributing to household chores. Alicia, devastated by the broken engagement, struggled financially, relying solely on her father's pension. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life, working hard and cherishing moments with my daughter. Though saddened by the situation with Brian's family, I found solace in my newfound independence and commitment to providing a better life for my daughter.